Sahar, Inji, hello, Sean. What's up? What's up?
Hi.
Hi, Anna.
Hello, hello. Juju.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Fresh out of the shower. Oh, fresh for y'all as well. I mean. I see John's here. Welcome, welcome. We're going to wait just a few more minutes while the room fills up, and then we will get started.
يا حبيبتي معلش. أنا بنت أخويا.
Hola. تعالي.
Hi guys. You feeling good? Are we ready?
Hi.
Hi.
زي ما نغير أسامينا.
Alrighty. Okay. Well, I'm recording now, so we are good to go. Welcome, Jon. We are so grateful to have you today. If you don't know Jon Castelli, he is one of Devout Collective's founding members, but he is also a very multi-talented mixing engineer who's worked on records and albums and singles for artists like Beyonce and Harry Styles and Kesha, and you name it. So we are so grateful to have him today. And today is all about mixing. I know it's a very complicated, can be kind of a complicated topic. And hopefully Jon is able to break down the basics for you all today and really get you started. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Jon. And thank you once again.
Of course. Hey guys. It is pretty complicated, but we're gonna take it nice and slow today. I guess we have I think we have 3 hours or something. So I don't remember the last time, if ever, I've had to go from the fundamentals. So I wrote some notes, but I think we're just gonna freestyle, and hopefully by the end of class we can understand what it means and the importance of and the value to what mixing a record is versus the art of writing it, producing it, crafting it from the beginning. Before we do that, though, because there's like 40 people here, and you guys can't really talk to me. So how do we engage? Hannah, you answer that, I guess, for me. How are we supposed to engage so we can have some sort of dialogue between the 40 of us?
All right, so everyone is using the chat, as you can already tell. I see everybody chatting along, and then also we have the raise hand feature. So if anyone has a question, definitely encourage to do the hand emoji and we can see you, unmute your mics, and hopefully it can be pretty conversational.
Okay. Okay, someone says it's cooking time. Okay, good. All right. That's what I'm getting at. Okay, so pay attention to chat, which I'll easily get distracted, but okay. So I guess it's a show of hands. I guess we have to raise hand function. I'm kind of curious what everybody's background is and how many, maybe just based on a number value of how many people are artists or want to be artists, songwriters, producers, or engineers. Like, is there anybody here in the chat that actually, at the end of the day, wants to be an engineer versus a producer or an artist? Engineer. Oh. This is for engineer? Wow. People want to be engineers. This is amazing. Okay. Okay, so there's a ton of engineers. Okay, this is amazing. Okay, it's in rare form to think that's the truth, because I was told, I'll tell a quick story, because I have a mentor that is one of the best to ever do it in the world for maybe 3 or 4 decades, Tony Maserati. And when I studied with him for 5 years, the first day I met him, I told him I wanted to be an engineer, and he told me, "No, you don't." He spoke for me. He said, "No, you don't. You want to be a producer. You make more money as a producer." And I said, "Well, I don't really do this for the money. I mean, money's good." And it survives certain lifestyle habits that one could want, but I love music, and I love the possibility to connect to an artist's nervous system, and a listener's nervous system, and change the way that they could possibly feel based on a lyric or a groove or something. And he just tried to convince me otherwise, but at the end of the conversation, this conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. He he said, well, if you really want it, you're in the right place. So then he, trained me for 5 years, and I became a mix engineer. Even though I've been doing this since I was 16, I'm now 37, so I've been doing it for a long time. And I think he's like now may be proud of me because I have records out that have worked out, but he always didn't want me to do it. So for all of you that want to be engineers, I think based on my mentorship, I should tell you, you probably shouldn't do it because it is grueling. You're the first person to arrive at a session and the last to leave if you're recording. You don't eat as well as the producers. They never feed you as well as they're getting fed. Artists, they either like fries or really bougie sushi, so you never really know what you're going to get when it comes to how artists. It's funny, a lot of artists just like fries, just not very nutritious. So I don't know how they're fueling their creative. Also, by the way, I had a cold for a week, so I'm going to sniffle, and I'm sorry, but I'm better today, thankfully. So that being said, well, there's a lot of engineers. So cool. Well, you're going to take this seriously then, instead of it being a requirement. So I mentioned the nervous system thing. I feel like there's so much in music that goes over a lot of people's heads, especially this day and age. There's so many distractions. So like I think when I was coming up and generations before me, people sat down with an album or a song, but a lot of times with an album, and they listened in headphones. I used to lie on the floor of my my bedroom or my studio whenever I had a studio, literally on the floor, and I'd had headphones on. I would listen down to an album. I would pull out the whether it was a vinyl or a CD. I would pull out the booklet inside. I think that's what they called it back then. And I would look at who did it. I would find out the studio that they recorded in. There was so much history and so much to learn from a body of work. And now I feel like that's a bit lost because we're listening to it in the background of a TV show, or we're looking at our phones and we're scanning for other things, and then a song pops up in a clip for 30 seconds, and now all of a sudden we decide if we like a song within a 15-second clip. I should say that I'm not talking from experience. I actually don't and have never had a TikTok, but I think that's how it works. And there's like 12-second or 15. I tend to make the TikTok mix for people, which is so strange to me. They're like, here's a 3-minute song. Let's have a 12-second version of it. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I know that that's how people are digesting to a degree. I'm of the era that we listen to whole songs, whole albums, and we try to see if there's a story to be told by an artist. And I think at the end of the day, as a mix engineer, where the finisher, I mean, there's mastering, which you'll participate with my very good friend and brother Dale Becker tomorrow. There's a little bit different of a finishing there because you have such a microscopic point of view. The song is already pretty much done. As a mixer, we have time to change, so there's a lot more trust in the finalization in that stage. And you can still be changing out vocal parts. You shouldn't be, theoretically, like the job of the engineer in the mix stage is not to be doing these things, but a lot of the times with trusted relationships and producers, you're there to be the final ear on what part makes what section and how much of it is prevalent. These are balances, this is the arrangement. There's so much importance on just being the person that says, this is good, this is great, this is done. And you're kind of a therapist to the artist. If they're in the room, you can play a lot of roles. And I think what makes a successful engineer, whether it be mixing, recording, mastering, is just being cool, just being open to trying all ideas. No idea is less important than another one until proven otherwise. So there are a lot of bad ideas in a room, but it's not bad until you try it and everybody in the room agrees that it's bad. So the engineer's job is to never do what the engineer does a lot, which is like, nah, that's not right. Like if that's your answer, then you've already lost the gig for the next time around. So you want to mostly just be cool and be open and try everything. And you know, a lot of the people I look up to, my elders, when I hear from what it's like to be in the room with them, and they've been successful for, like I said, 3-4 decades, and you know, the most amount of hit records anyway, I could never even dream of having the success that they've had. That normally the response is, oh, they were cool and they tried everything and had no ego. So I'm trying to learn that. I have a bit of an ego because I really think that I know better a lot of the time. So I'm just being honest because this is an important class. A lot of times I think I do know better, and I'm probably wrong, because what's better for the song is what the artist wants, and it's not what the engineer wants. It's never my song. It's never going to be your song if you're not performing it, if you don't have to go tour it for 18 months to 3 years till the rest of your life, if you're lucky, or if the artist is lucky enough to have that level of success. It's not our record, it's their record. So there's a fine line of implementing your vision on it, as well as just allowing theirs to be expressed. And I feel really lucky to be able to do that. I feel really lucky to be able to be a part of the story of an artist's journey, and getting to. I think a lot of engineers don't really listen to lyrics either, and I love a good sad pop song lyric, like little. I mean, sometimes there's something to say about like a happy record, like that Pharrell Happy record. I hated that song for so many years, and then at one point I was like, actually, this is pretty damn good. I just maybe wasn't looking to be happy for 3 years, or there's a point for all types of emotional content to records. But that was the first thing I wanted to talk about, which is the importance of the emotional connection. And the engineer, whether they're in the beginning or the end of the process, can get in the way of that. And we can overcook sounds, we can over process, we can do too much to something that was already magical, and we can micro edit and change the feel of a performance, of a pattern, and straight up ruin it. And an artist might not then be able to communicate how you did wrong. Sometimes they just don't tell you anything, and then they go another direction, or they try to communicate and then they feel like an idiot because they don't know the engineer language, jargon, all these things that like we're supposed to know. And maybe chapter 1 of today's class is going to be speak like an artist, not like an engineer, where we're going to talk about the fundamentals of engineering. And you need to know what EQ is, and dynamic control, like compression and limiting, and gain staging, and balances, and volume, and sends, and returns, and effects. And there's so many vocabulary words, but you don't talk about them in a session. If you talk about them in a session, you've lost the connection to the artist, unless they know this and really want to geek out on it. And you'll know that right away, because they'll enter the room and they'll look at a piece of gear and they'll go, oh, 1176, huh? I use that on my vocal. And I'd be like, cool. I have 2 rules in my studio, which is always fill up the water pitcher when it's near empty, and don't talk about frequencies in front of artists. Those are the only 2 rules, and anything else goes. Oh, maybe besides smoking. I don't know about smoking, but that's like an unwritten rule. You can't smoke in the studio. Like, it's just not cigarettes, that is, because it's disgusting. So besides that, by the way, I probably will rant and do things like that as well, where that's kind of irrelevant to the class, but that's just kind of how my thoughts go. So you learn the fundamentals, you learn the techniques. It's very important. It's like you have to understand the rules before you break them, concept, but you never talk about them. Like, never. There's never a reason to say the phrase, I'm going to take 2K out of that vocal in a session, ever. That's just like one no. That's the first no. The second no would probably be, don't talk back to someone in the room. Like, that's the level of importance. It's like, 1, never talk about frequencies, and 2, never say no. Those are like, that's it. And then fill up the water, because everyone needs to be hydrated. That's just, that's a real fundamental thing here. That being said, I don't know how much everyone here knows about engineering. So do we know what an equalizer is? Anybody? Raise their hand.
Anyone?
Is that a thumbs up? Someone thumbs up videoed? Yeah.
I can
Okay, we
find.
do.
Hello.
This is my favorite part because like everybody's hand, then I see other people's faces, and some people have their names up and some people have their faces up. Okay, and some people are two. Okay, there's two of you there. Yes, but I don't know the definition. Okay, great. I don't know the definition either. So I did pull up, I do have for after the class, and maybe we'll do during, but I pulled up two very good examples of one of equalization and a kind of a 15-minute video, and then one long article about compression that will explain it in words that you can read after, or maybe we do it during class because it's long, better than I can ever describe it because you know, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a mathematician, and there is some important math to be done to describe what, you know, the ratio is on a compressor and why, you know, why an EQ, why a 440 hertz is the same as 220 hertz, just down an octave, and that's an A. Like those things they're cool if you really care to know, but it doesn't really matter because I've never sat and looked at the key of a record and said, I need to boost 440 hertz because the key of the song is A. And it was just, we don't work like that. And the engineers that do, the stuff sounds too sterile and too perfect. And nobody ever wants that. A lot of people want more character and dirt and filth and energy. And it's like, it's cool to know that. But the definition of an EQ that I would, oh, this is someone wrote this. Okay, basically, we're a group of 40 who need to learn fundamentals for different reasons, whether they communicate with engineers better or start their engineering career, or have general understanding to be able to do their own demos and mixes before sending out to an engineer, or even the first starting person. Amazing. That's great. Okay, we can do that. So an EQ is used. Let's start with EQ because it's probably the go-to and the first thing we think of when we think about mixing. We see this, you know, this screen of 5 colors with different parameters that you can change. And some of us, for me, my favorite EQ, and I have a video of this one, is the FabFilter Pro Q3, because it comes up as a blank page. There's nothing on it. And you can click anywhere and you can add what's called a band, which is a frequency spectrum band, B-A-N-D, like a musical group. And you basically can choose anywhere in the range from, you know, 10 hertz, which is probably the lowest. Can't even really hear 10 hertz. I mean, you can go all the way down to 0, but we tend to hear in the human spectrum between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz, which is 20,000 hertz. And the EQ works within, you know, within those frequencies. And anywhere in between that, you can choose to make what we would call a move, some sort of EQ move. So for example, if you're working with a piano, the piano occupies, it's actually one of the few instruments that equally populates the entire frequency spectrum evenly based on wherever your hands are at. So if you think about the hands on the piano, if you're playing bass notes with your left hand or high notes with your right hand, you can balance that out visually. So that's actually how I think of a mix. I think about the mix in 2 hands of a piano, because that's just like, you know, I don't actually know if that's accurate in Egypt, so I should be, but in Western music, piano is kind of the ancient compositional instrument where, you know, composers would sit at the piano and orchestrate the entirety of a symphony with just that one instrument, and then they would hire someone called an orchestrator to, you know, parse that out to the cello or the bass or, you know, the viola, the violin, and all the other instruments that make up the orchestra. But it started with the piano. So visually, for me, as a classical and jazz trained musician, I think about mixing in the balances of how a piano would stand up frequency wise. Thinking about the EQ, say you have a muddy sounding piano that's probably existing in what we call the low mids, which is anywhere from 200 hertz to 600, 700, 800 hertz, which is this kind of muddy box. So you kind of feel like you have your hands over your nose. Like if there was a vocal, you would sound like nasally, and you want to clear that stuff out a lot of the time. Now, basically everything I'm going to say here is very vague because everything is case dependent, and you might record some piano that is really high, high frequency oriented, and you might say, oh, well, Jon told us that there's a lot of mud in a piano, and we're going to want to take out 400 hertz in the piano. That is accurate. A lot of the times you do want to, but sometimes you don't. So obviously this is all case dependent, and the best I can offer you is how often something may or may not happen. But very, very, very commonly, there's a lot of mud at a piano. It depends, if you're in a small room, someone says, I hate recording myself playing piano. Well, if the room is small, there's going to be a lot more muddy buildup because of early reflections in the room. And you can imagine what it feels like to be in a small room. It's claustrophobic, it's tight, and there's a lot of resonances in kind of the fundamental frequencies of that mid range of the piano. So we go in and we take an EQ, and we have a band which has a Q. The Q is also known as the bandwidth, which is like how wide of a selection. Like basically, you can have this narrow, if you some sort of harmonic beepy noise, and you want to take out like only the beep, you want to be really narrow. But if you want to open up the sound of an instrument, you would widen that Q, widen that bandwidth, and you would offer, a chance to have a wider reduction, right? So an EQ is just volume over specific frequencies. It's probably the best way to define how we could think about an EQ. You have volume over selected frequencies, specifically, or a range of frequencies. So if I were working on a muddy piano, I would take an EQ and I would put it around 200, 300 hertz, and I would turn up the volume or the gain of that EQ band, and I would widen the Q until I heard, how wide that area of mud is, and then I would subtract it. I would take it down. I would take it down however much, you think, before it sounds hollow, unless of course you're going for a hollow piano sound, and then that's how you would do this as well. I'm also getting distracted because right now there's a black screen and I kind of want to see faces. How do I do this? Hold on a second. No, that's my face. We don't want to see that one. How do we see faces? There's 34. Gallery. There it is. Oh, sick. That's so much nicer. Okay, cool. I'm looking at a blank screen. I can't tell if anybody is interested at all in what I'm saying. So we definitely want interest and engagement. So, okay, that would be how we would clean out some mud. I wish there was a way for me to show you this, but I don't necessarily have the capabilities of doing that through this. Hannah, are you there? I'm wondering if we can figure out a way to show this, but anyway, we'll get there. You know what? I can also send this video link. Let me copy this. I'm going to put this in the chat if you feel the need to pull this up. Oh, I can't send a link? Oh, it's weird. It won't let me send a link. Really? Huh. Okay, well, I can't send a link, so that's a bit annoying. Okay. Never mind on that. Okay, so EQ, definition, volume of specific frequency range. Specific frequencies, specific or range of. You can add it or you can subtract it. I tend to be referred to as a subtractive engineer, meaning in order to get things to be to sit in a mix, you do a lot of subtractive EQ, clean things out, make space. There's also additive EQ, which brings a lot of energy and character. So if something sounds dull, you're going to obviously want to brighten the top end of it. There's a wide range of tools that can offer a chance to do this in a smooth way or a harsh way. You can distort, that could be a positive, that could be a negative. Sometimes we distort in a way that sounds musical, and sometimes we distort like a crazy guitar amp that gives us the feeling of anxiety or sort of angst or anger or aggression. Sometimes we have smooth sounding distortions that maybe like a Fender Rhodes or something that's warm and bubbly and feels cozy and harmonic. We could do that with EQ as well. There's EQ tools that have built-in saturations, which we'll get to later in this class, because saturation is probably my favorite thing to talk about and to use. But that's a little bit more advanced, so maybe we'll save that for a little bit. Can we have, if you can slide that camera to the right, a nice view. That's the studio is back there. We can take a tour. This was my home. This is my studio. I just moved out as a home, but my studio is back there. And there's a lot of beautiful light and space. I've been here for 10 years. I have a kitchen, which I'm sitting in. I tend to like to sit in the kitchen because I like to cook almost as much as I like to mix. So I sit in the kitchen. But we'll get to the studio, because maybe there's a way I can put the camera on an EQ move. Hannah, you're back now. I can see you now. So I wonder how I can demonstrate things. Like if I sit next to the computer, could I somehow put the camera so like you can see me EQing? Should I do that?
Yeah, you can do that. We also have share screen function if there's anything you wanted to share on your computer.
Well, I'm on a different computer than the studio. Oh, maybe I do that. Hold on. Let's go take a walk. I would love to show an EQ move, because I don't know how you would hear the audio, but because yeah. Here, let's go.
The setup looks beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a lot of light.
Love that.
I'm trying to maybe I get on the same Zoom on here. Guys, bear with me here, because this is important. Because if I could show you an EQ move, then you will understand what I'm talking about. By the way, if I play a song and you could hear it to the cameras, you can't, oh, you're recording this, but you don't use this for any sort of, because I can't like play songs, because then people are like, leaking worked, unreleased worked music. So we have to be careful of that. Let's try what has a piano in this. Just opening up a session here, guys. See, it doesn't quite. See if I can get on the same Zoom link on the other computer. Okay. Probably I don't have Zoom on my studio computer. That makes no sense because I used to. Okay, I don't want to waste time. So can I? We're gonna just turn this around for a minute. And we're going to look at an EQ. Okay, so can you guys see what's happening here with this EQ?
Yeah.
Give me okay, cool.
Yeah, we can.
So, okay, great. So this sound is kind of a bubbly. You can't necessarily hear it very clearly, but it has some bubbly feature to it, the keyboard. And in this area, I chose to leave it alone because it's actually sitting properly, but there's some overtones down here that I could, take out to make more room, or say after I take out the frequency, I want more of this upper range of it to speak through, maybe on a smaller speaker, a smaller device. I could also turn the volume up after that. So you're if you're being subtractive, you might be taking out some obtrusive sounds, some annoying sounds, and able to make it louder, right? Because a lot of the times the goal is to make a sound louder. And you can do that with EQ, or you can do it with volume, or you can do it by reducing dynamic range with the compressor, which we'll get to. But a lot of the times for me personally, I'm trying to get rid of frequencies that are annoying me so I can turn up the frequencies that are good. And that might just mean getting rid of some and turning up the volume, or doing what I'm doing here, which is taking out these down here and boosting these up here. And this is a very dramatic EQ. It would probably look a little closer to something more subtle like that. But you get the idea. You can go as far. Oh, I wish you could hear that, because it completely changes the sound. Unless you're hearing through my AirPods, you wouldn't be able to tell. Actually sounds kind of cool, but that's wild. Okay, we're not going to do that, but it's kind of cool. Okay, turning back around. Any thoughts on what I just tried to show you there? Oh my God, someone said Pro Tools. That's so funny. This is Pro Tools. I mix in Pro Tools. I've tried other things, but I've been mixing in Pro Tools for 20 years. And for me, it's the best software for mixing. I don't think it's the best software for producing. I think something closer to Ableton or FL Studio or Logic might be a bit better for producing. There's reasons why Pro Tools would be cool for producing, because of its limitations, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you're doing live music oriented. If you're doing sample based and beat driven music, I think Ableton might be better for that. But as a mixer, I think Pro Tools is the industry standard, and we should have talked about that. Software is important. Pro Tools definitely industry standard, probably the best sounding for finishing records. There's something about the way that it sounds final coming out of Pro Tools. When I hear something coming out of Logic, I can usually tell, and it sounds soft, sounds a bit rounded off and a bit unfinished. And I can usually tell when a producer's working in Logic, and I can always tell when a producer's working in Ableton, because it just sounds like there's a wall at the end that we're just trying to break through this wall. And once you take it out of Ableton, it's easy to break through that wall in Pro Tools, because it just sounds wider and deeper and bigger. But let's stay to EQ for now. Any thoughts about Martina says Fab Filter is a great plugin for EQing, guys. Absolutely. I use that EQ 90% of the time for those kind of subtractive cut moves, the reduction moves. I rarely boost with it because there's no real character to it. There's other EQs that have more character, that if you wanted to be more additive and boost, as we would call it, with it. Like, for example, if I were to show you, I really like very classic piece of gear, the SSL console. Can I flip? No, you can't. Only phones do that. So if I were to This. The SSL, you know, you're turning the frequencies more like you were on an analog console back in the day. And I use this EQ a lot for boosting, for adding to the sound. You can turn up, you can distort with it. There's a lot more you can do with something like that for character. But the Fab filter is great for what's that plugin? That is the SSL channel strip from Plugin Alliance. Plugin Alliance is great. They have a subscription where you just, I think it's just some monthly fee, and you get access to their entire catalog. Oh, I like this question. If my voice is more in the mid-range when IQ, should I boost it? Or should I boost the high end and cut a little bit more of the mid-range? That's very interesting. Once again, it depends. That's a really good question, though, because if your voice is sitting in the mid-range, that's probably a positive thing, because that's where the presence is of the voice. If it's in the lower mid-range and it sounds boomy and boxy, yeah, you'd want to reduce that and boost more high end. I think that the character of the voice is in the mid-range. So if you already exist there, I would try to leave as much as possible and boost around it, and only take out the mid-range if it's annoying, if it's harsh, if it's hurting you, if it's what we would call like a non-musical mid-range. But mid-range is where we'll cut in front of a guitar or a piano or a drum, a heavy drum. So you want as much mid-range as possible in a vocal, because that's how you're going to let it speak on top of all the other instruments. What setup should we have to enhance the low end frequencies in our vocals? Oh, what do you mean low end? That's a lot of vocals don't have low end. So
Did you want me to like explain?
yeah,
Sorry, okay.
elaborate. Yeah, sure. No, go for it, please.
Thank you. And sorry, I know this is like super specific, but I was in a situation a couple of days ago where I did my recordings at home, and when I went to the studio with the mixing engineer, he was like showing me the frequency that same Fab filter, like Pro whatever thing, and it was like starting at a super high frequency. Now it is a very high pitched song, and it was like kind of harsh, and he's like, well, I can't enhance the low ends because they're not there, you need to change your setup. And I just don't know how to do that.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I wish I could see this, because change your setup, because he's saying that there's probably too much high end. Maybe you're singing too close to the mic, right? That this is very subjective. This is very hard to know without being a part of the visual of this thing. I would say that maybe you're too close to a wall. Maybe you're singing too close to the microphone, but that would be more of a boomy effect. So you would get this kind of you get a lot of low end. But if he's telling you that, my overall thought on that is, if he's telling you he can't do something, he's wrong, and he can fix, he can add low end. He might just have to do something really crazy, like taking the knob. Oh, you know what? Let's use the Pro Q, because it's more of a visual thing. Let me see. I love this turning around thing. It's great. Nope. Something like that. Low end. Let's go to a vocal.
And we can't hear what's on the screen. We can see it.
I know.
Okay.
I know, which is for safety's sake is a good thing. Because I don't know how we would show this, because basically my studio setup is very specific, and there's no way to get that output out to this very, very quickly. It would take me a lot of time, but it's probably better this way. So there's no low end in this vocal. It ends at 200. And we're controlling these upper parts of it. But if you wanted to get low end in the vocal, I mean, it's pretty simple with EQ. You can just, now there's low end. So if it was recorded, if this engineer is saying you didn't record, and you recorded and nothing is like below this area, and all of this doesn't exist whenever this area doesn't exist anymore, that could be a problem, but I doubt that's the case. That sounds near impossible for that to have happened. So if I were him, I would probably take what we call a shelf EQ, high shelf. It looks like this, and I would probably take down all the high end to showcase and make the low end more prominent, right? So we're just making a really dramatic move. If there's too much high end, basically, if something is more prominent in one area than the other, if you reduce it in one area, it exposes the other. So if you have too much high end in your recording, let's just take these back down, get rid of these two smart technical moves. And there's too much high end. If we do this and we take the high end down, there's going to by default be more low end because you're just exposing the bottom hand of the piano, as I mentioned, instead of the top hand of the piano. And if you need even more, then you can turn up.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Does that make sense? And you can be as dramatic or subtle as you want. So if there's no, I think like it's a lot of the times we talk about really subtle moves in engineering, like little micro detail moves. And sometimes you have to be heavy-handed. And sometimes you have to, do ridiculous things like boost 20 dB, which is more vocabulary. So dB is decibels. That's the number that we see from 0 to, I think this EQ goes up to 30 dB. dB is gain, dB is volume, dB is, there's a lot of words for it. Call it voltage, it's power, it's energy, it's acoustic energy in both a digital and an analog realm. That's just jargon and unnecessary, but it's basically volume per frequency. So if you boost, sometimes you boost or cut 1 dB just because you need a subtle fix in that area. But if your engineer is saying you don't have any low end and you want to make low end, you might have to boost closer to 10 to 20 dB up. And that might seem like a lot visually, like on this EQ I just showed, it's like the thing looks stupid. But a lot of the times on EQ moves that I'm making on very important records, they look very stupid. And we're not here to make aesthetically pretty EQ moves. We're here to make things sound good or bad. Sometimes we want to make things sound bad or messed up sounding. That being said, a little caveat, I actually tend to make pretty looking EQ moves because I am a little bit OCD. So they tend to look nicer than they should, but I'm wrong. Like I'm straight up like, no, there's no need to make something look pretty. This is just my own obsession. Someone had a question and then someone said same question. If we're mixing on Logic, how do we export the files to Pro Tools for mixing? Can we demonstrate what bad low cut and bad high cut mixing? Oh, we'll get there. Cool. Exporting in Logic, you would just in the file menu of Logic, there's an export all tracks as WAV files. So basically we call them stems. Which if you are producing in Ableton or Logic, and there's great, you could just Google this, which is just exporting stems from Logic. And I'm sure you'll get a 30-second tutorial on how to do that. It's very simple. Yet the biggest professionals in the world still mess up their stem exports, which is crazy to me. It happens all the time. Because you want to, it can be complicated depending on how you're routing things, but basically the simple answer is you go to file and export stems as audio as WAV files, and
can I
can
I expand on this? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I meant like if I'm exporting from Logic, and do I export the vocal like just the raw vocal, like I just leave it the volume and everything and just export it raw along with the instruments and then export it to Pro Tools?
Yes, you can. I would, if you've produced it, say you have reverbs and effects, and you've already done EQ moves that you like in Logic, you'd want to export them what we call wet, processed, not dry and raw. I would never want the raw file If you've spent days, months, years, weeks, hours dialing in something that you think already sounds good, we would want that to be as you had it. That this is where it gets complicated, because if possible, you would want to export the reverb and the effects separate than the dry raw vocal that you have. So it would not be one stem with it all on it. But that's a bit more advanced. That's not easy to just describe. That's why I'm saying I think that there is probably some sort of tutorial on the internet on how to do that more effectively, because you would want the vocal to come in two parts. You'd want the vocal as is, raw, and then the effects, reverbs, delays, choruses, all those kinds of effects separate, which, you know, depends on how you're routing in Logic or in Pro Tools. We have what's called sends and returns. Instead of just putting a plugin on, like, there's like an amateur way to do this, which would be you just put the reverb on the vocal or on the guitar or on the instrument. And then the more quote unquote professional way to do it would be to have some sort of what we call a return, an effects return, and then a send. And you would send the vocal to the reverb, and then that would be two separate tracks. For example, on a console, they used to have effects returns that you would, you know, that you could turn a knob and you can send it to the thing. And then you would capture that stem separately, which you can do in Logic, you can do in Pro Tools, you can do all these things, and it's relatively easy to do once shown. So, for example, let's go back to Pro Tools. And if we go to the mix view window, I have a reverb plugin over here called 7th Heaven. And if I want a vocal to go to that, which I have over here, this is a send. So it is basically what we call a small fader versus the large faders at the bottom. The large fader is the volume fader, the overall volume. And on the small faders, which we have access to 10, which is below the inserts or the plugin area up here, which, you know, we could add plugins here. Below that is what we call the small fader or the sends. So I have this Bricasti, which is an analog piece of gear that this plugin company is modeling. And on this background vocal, I am sending the small fader volume to that reverb. So then after that, this reverb becomes a separate stem from the vocal. If I were to be bouncing stems or exporting later, I can export the Bricasti separate than this file, which is verse BGV1 or however. Does that at all answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
It's a bit complicated. Exporting stems is simple as a concept, meaning you just file export. But if you were to do that, it will do it with everything that is on the tracks, as you seem to know already, and that's why you're asking the question. And most tracks you would want to do that with. But if you were going to get your song professionally mixed, maybe by someone like me, I would ask you to have the reverbs, if possible, but sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes people have recorded a demo vocal and it has had reverbs and delays just thrown on the sound right from the beginning. It's very hard to remake that if someone is very, very much in love with the performance and the sound. Then I would say just leave it. But that happens like maybe 1 in 10 times. We'll just go, okay, let's leave it. There's always usually a way to get around it, unless there's some sort of nostalgia to the way it was recorded 4 years ago in a bedroom, and that's just what people are in love with, and that's okay. And I'm never going to be against that. But you want to be able to separate the effects from the processed vocal. And just to be specific, when I say the processed vocal, the EQ, the compression, the distortion, all of those effects can be maintained on the export. But the reverbs and things that you might want to change the balances of later, or let someone like me change the balances of later, that should be separate. But I know there's a way to do it in Logic, where it's in the file export window, and there's probably a way to capture returns separately. it comes with practice, and there are EQ frequency cheat sheets. Yes, this is great. Yes, there are, exactly. There's some EQ cheat sheets on, you know, in a bass drum, you want to, yeah, we can talk super specifics, but yeah, there's actually back in the day when I was young, we didn't have YouTube, and I didn't have Google. So we had Google, we didn't have YouTube, sorry. And I used to learn by reading magazines. So I would go to a local bookstore and I would buy a magazine, and every month there was an interview with a mix engineer in this one, I think it was Mix magazine. And I would listen to the album, and then I would read about how they achieved a certain sound. And a lot of the times was, oh, well, in this bass drum, I cut 400 hertz, 2.5 dB. And I was like, okay, cool. So let's go copy this exact move on a drum that I'm working on. Well, in a rock song versus a hip hop song or an R&B song, those frequencies are going to feel different. So I would take more of a pop hip hop song, and I would apply the rock album EQ that I thought I liked, and it sounded awful. I was like, wait, but this guy says he does it this way, and he has all this success, like it has to be. So I would copy, and then I would realize, well, that's stupid. So why copy what someone else does? Because every sound is different and every song is different. The key, the intention, all this stuff is different. But if you were to see the cheat sheet and you can try it, then you can adjust accordingly based on what you think is a little better. So I would think to myself, okay, well, if they're saying cut 450 hertz in this bass drum, well, what if I did 350? What if I did 500? And all of a sudden I would start to develop my own characteristics of where my drums sat or my bass sat versus this other record that I found really inspiring. Because if you have a cheat sheet, and someone's asking where to get a cheat sheet, I don't know. We could find one. I'll try to find one before the class is over. Actually, you know what? If you Google engine ears, I'm going to write it. Let's see, engine. For some reason, I can't type to this. It's so strange. Like, it won't let me send to the chat. Why not? I want to type to you guys. That worked. Okay. If you look up engineers on Instagram, it's spelled engine and then EARS. They have, I don't think everything they do is fantastic, but there's a lot of good fundamental resources on things to look for in what we're talking about now, which is kind of an EQ cheat sheet of like, okay, well, where does a vocal normally sit? Where does a piano normally sit? Where does a bass drum normally sit? Where does a snare drum normally sit? They have some really good visuals on their Instagram about what that is. And I think that that might be helpful for this. And now that I know I can send stuff, you should take this YouTube and watch it at some point, because this is a very good demonstration of what EQ looks like at a deeper sense from FabFilter. It's from their older model EQ from, my God, maybe 8 years ago, but the video still stands up. And I actually rewatched the video just to remember certain things. Every year or so, I try to remind myself of what this technical tool and how powerful, it can be. But I think, like, if we're thinking about muddy frequencies, you're thinking between 200 and 800 hertz. And we like to reduce, I reduce that in so many things. So that's kind of a go-to. You're risking making things sound too thin, but at the same time, you're also opting to show some clarity on instruments that would otherwise be muddy. Upper mid range is like that 2K 2000 to 6,000 hertz. That is very aggressive sounding and is where a lot of presence on instruments sit. but also if you turn up the speakers too loud, that's what will hurt your ears, because basically our ears, there's this thing called the Fletcher-Munson curve, which is above between 2,000 and 5,000 hertz. Our ears hear it 3 dB higher biologically, because we need to hear in the wild if like a wolf or like an animal is going to come attack us. And that's kind of where those sounds, just the history of frequencies, you know, just wolves attacking you, like these are things that we have to worry about, you know, on a day-to-day basis. But our ears hear that stuff louder, so we actually want to reduce that stuff to make things sound smoother. So if you're thinking about, do you want your record to be smooth and you know, more in an R&B category of things versus a rock record, R&B groovy records tend to be smoother sounding, and that's because we reduce a lot in that upper mid-range area, the 3K, where we're hearing a 3 dB louder. That stuff is cut, you know, at least for me personally, my taste. I'm like, can we get rid of that as much as possible? Because that's going to give you a rounder sounding, more moody sounding record, and that tends to be where I gravitate towards when it comes to the overall sound of records. I know we have zero experience in sound mixing, but I need to share something I would say during my performances. I have a band, 3 voices, oud percussion sounds great. I always find the sounds and instrument not as same without the mix, and also using ear, like sometimes I feel like I can't hear anything either. I shouldn't even nothing changes after performance. Oh, you're talking about a live thing. Okay, this is a question for a live mix engineer. It's very, very different world. To be honest, I don't know how to answer that question, so I might have to just, I'm sorry, but that's going to be, if that's a live situation, that's very, very, very different, and a world that I don't touch because of how difficult it is. And there's no trial and error when you're live, because that's the idea of the whole thing, is you're in a live performance, and like how to capture it being real, but also have separation between all the voices and the oud and all the percussions. It sounds very difficult, but also sounds very cool. So whatever that band is, I want to know what that is after this, because that sounds really, really awesome. We don't have oud percussion and 3 voice bands in the United States, so very, very cool. And I love the oud. What else on EQ? Any more EQ questions? No. Let's talk about high frequencies. Let's talk about how it can be airy, or it can hurt and be really harsh, because there's a balance. Like say Ariana Grande or something, or Mariah Carey, which is kind of like the you know, the original. Oh, I love that. Yes, someone connect to your engineer in Cairo. That sounds great. I'm the percussionist in the band. Well, then tell them to turn up the percussion. You know, just like, hey, can I get more of me? You know, that's really what you're asking me to tell you. Just turn up the volume.
Yeah.
More.
Okay.
That's it. When you're in a band, like as the engineer, when I work with mostly pop artists and single artists, but sometimes when there's a band, the main goal of the engineer is to just make everybody happy, and it's just a lot of turning up the person that's asking to be turned up. So if you're the percussionist, just be like, more of me, and let the engineer figure out how to do that. But you know, although now that I'm thinking about it, if I think about mixing a percussionist, you wouldn't want to take out the low mids that I'm talking about. On a lot of instruments get muddy. That's where it speaks. So like depending on the percussion, if you're talking about a shaker, a hand shaker, or like a hand percussion, I'm assuming that you're talking about that kind of maybe percussion. There's tonality in the drum, right? So they go doom, 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 doom. Like if you cut out the low mids of that sound, the tonality, it starts to go like, where's the
Exactly.
harmonic content?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Is that
I also have a
is that what we're talking about?
percussion.
Yes, how like this, yeah.
Are we answering the question? Okay, great. Yeah, we want more of the tonality. So that might be adding the frequency I'm talking about, taking out in a piano or in a muddy sounding thing, in a hand drum and a percussion. We want more of that. We want that boosted. It's actually one of the first things, if I ever get a hand percussion track in a stem on a mix, I'm mostly boosting to get the tonality of that, because otherwise they sound flat and papery, and like you're only hearing the skin of the drum, and a drum is a drum for a reason. It's deep, right? So the the drum has resonance to it. You know, whether it's a conga drum or a tom, a rack tom or a floor tom on a drum set, like there's a reason why it has two heads or one head and then space to experience the sound to develop. And if you're choking the tonality out of it by you know, getting rid of those frequencies, and you're never going to hear it, and you're just going to hear you know, the top end of it, which is going to compete with, you know, voices. It's going to compete with the other percussion. We would in that case, we'd want to do what we call filtering, which I will show you. Let's open up an EQ here. Do I have percussion in this? Actually, this song might have some percussion. No hi-hat, claps, lasers. No lasers. I feel like I have a song that would have the percussion. Well, let me just show you what a filter is, because I think that's really important when it comes to high end. Let's open up a hi-hat. Okay. Okay, we're looking at a hi-hat at the moment. And to me, this hi-hat sounds really noisy. And you can tell there's just all of this, you know, all of this high frequency stuff. If I was doing a hand drum, I would want more, or percussion, I would want more of the low stuff to happen, right? So if we turn this,
Jon, is there any way that we could get Zoom on this computer?
I mean, I want to. For some reason, it's not happening. I tried to download it while we were talking, and it didn't like.
There's a situation actually with Pro Tools is that it's difficult to record the sound from Pro Tools. So do you have like a way around that? Like if you do download Zoom, is there a way that you can show us?
No, that's what
Like,
I was
know that
saying. You
yeah.
kind of can't do that. That's why I don't think it would help, because it would help show you, but it wouldn't help. Hold on. Let me see here. But for some reason, I can't even download Zoom. This is very strange, because I have the invite.
Isn't there?
I'm an engineer. I swear I'm an
download
engineer,
it?
guys. I swear.
I believe you.
Launch
Isn't there a way
meeting.
to log on without downloading Zoom?
Yeah.
It's safe.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm clicking launch meeting, and it's not letting me. And I wonder it's because I'm on this one already. Maybe I need to get out of this one, but then I'm leaving you. All right, let's try that. One sec. Be right back.
So maybe I ask you a question during your now, if I can. A short question. Hi.
So for this session, I'm going to encourage you guys to ask as many questions in class, and also write down questions that you have, and we will get the answer for you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not letting me do it. It's not letting me do it on the computer. I don't know why.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
Is it possible to have like a guideline book, or a PDF, a small PDF for all the information here for like people like me who have zero experience in mixing and no information about it at all?
Yes.
So
Um,
memorize it.
yeah, I don't quite yes, we will find resources. Um I have one because we didn't get into compression yet. And I found one on that to explain because it's so the short answer is yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
This thing I just sent in the chat
I have a
is
question about EQ. I was trying to raise my hand a couple of times. Is it okay to?
yes.
Yeah, so I would really like if you let us know what are the different types of EQs you use for different types of instruments. For example, do you use the FabFilter EQ for everything, or do you use different EQs? And if you could just also give the girls a quick explanation on what different EQs do. Some of them have their own color and different presets and saturations, just for the beginners.
Yes, of course. Yes, I was saying earlier that I use the fat filter for most surgical moves, most subtractive things, like cleaning out sounds. There's zero character to that EQ. That's how I would. It's a very transparent EQ, right? So the Pro Q3, yes, I use for almost everything when it comes to reducing frequencies and reducing harshness or mud. It just sounds very clean. It doesn't change. Doesn't change the sound very much. But I was saying earlier, I like to use that SSL plugin. Any SSL plugin will do a very similar thing. I'm a little geeky on I like that plugin alliance one that I mentioned. But when you think about SSL or API or Neve, these are very classic companies from the 1970s that started making consoles that had more character to it. And when you were talking about the saturation, yeah, there's built-in color and harmonic saturation to these EQs. So if I was thinking about drums, I would use SSL, for example, because it's kind of like a Dr. Dre staple. Dr. Dre used a lot of SSL, or almost exclusively SSL on his recordings, and there's some quintessential sound of drums and mid-range and
Can you show us,
to that.
can you show us some of these plugins, just like as
Mhm.
from your laptop, like how you just showed us before?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Of course. This is the SSL that I pulled up earlier. Basically, if you were to Google SSL console, which we can do, so you can see what this is modeling from back in the day. Can we show a real one? Yeah. No, this is a new.
This is basically different from the FabFilter as an EQ because it's more like knobs, and we work on
Yes.
frequencies and we eliminate the frequencies from the knobs, and not like a channel strip or
Yes. This is a channel strip.
Okay.
So basically what I'm pulling up so I can show you is this is an what the actual thing was, right? Back in the day. Right. We see like a giant in studio, which I don't know if in Cairo they have studios with these big consoles. They were ubiquitous. Everywhere you went to a studio, you would see a console like this. And this is basically anywhere from 24 to 96 channels of the same thing. So now we have plugins that are doing the same thing, and you can put them on every track in Pro Tools, and it emulates this and the same signal flow that starts with the mic preamp at the top or the line input all the way down to the fader, which is the last volume. And the EQ is here. There's a compressor. There's a gate. There's filters. There's a lot of functionality to these channel strips. And I like this one personally just because of the character. And that's why I brought this one up first. Now you can EQ. You can also cut with the knobs too. So for example, you could change the bandwidth, the Q we talked about earlier, the width of the frequency range that will be changing. There's just less of a visual representation of what's happening because it's an old school tool. and they're emulating the sound and functionality of an old school tool. I think for modern uses, it's nice to have the fab filter because you can see what's changing. You can see the width of the cue changing as I move about, cutting, and there's a visual representation of what's happening. And there's an analyzer in the background, so as the hi-hat plays, we can see the change. We can see in this analyzer, you can see the change. So that's why I think that tool is great. But this has more character, more sound, more nostalgia to me, more understanding of what historically an engineer was doing. If we look at an API, it's the same concept. You basically have the frequency selection and you would turn the knob up. This has a different sound. This has an even more aggressive sound, more like a rock sound, not subtle, not necessarily pleasing to the ear, very, very aggressive, but has its place, maybe on a guitar, for example. I tend to use this EQ a lot for guitar. I like to boost that 1.5 kilohertz area on guitar. It's very musical. It lets you hear the strumming of the guitar. That would also translate to the hammers on the piano. So if you want more attack on a piano, we might want to use an API and boost that 1.5 or that 3K to get more attack to the piano. Same thing on snare drum. Things that are very attacky, this API works really well at. What else we have? I said Neve. So if we go to a Neve, another very classic EQ for vocals specifically. We don't have a selectable frequency on what they call the shelf here. I believe it's 10K, but on a vocal, it sounds very airy. So any Neve 1073, the top end would be really nice on a vocal, for example. And you have a selectable bottom frequency for a filter. You have a selectable bottom frequency for a low shelf. So 60 hertz here, really nice for bass drums or bass. And upwards of 220 might be really nice for, I'm moving really fast here, just so you know, you can tell me to slow down. 220, really nice for the bottom resonance of a snare drum, or the upper harmonics of a bass guitar, or the piano low end, to fill out a piano, to fill out an acoustic guitar, 220, that area. And now these are old school tools. So again, going back to the difference between seeing this, we have more flexibility over seeing what's happening. So you don't have to trust your ears as much. You can actually see what's going on. With tools like this, you have to trust your ear. You have to turn a knob and you're like, oh, I like that more. I like that better. Oh, that's worse. Why did I do that? And I think that, when it comes to beginners, I would lean more towards the fab filter so you can actually see the results. And then kind of a fun thing that you can do is, say you want to boost the 10K on a vocal with this knob here on the Neve. What if you do that here, so you can hear what's happening first, and then hear the difference between a no character EQ like fab filter and then a full character EQ like the Neve, so you can really train your ear. That's something, if you were in my studio with me right now, we would do that. We would listen to what the fab filter sounds like, and then what the Neve sounds like, what the Neve is being modeled after, versus what this kind of sterile sounding EQ. There's nothing wrong with the sterile sound. It's just you won't have as much saturation, like you're talking about in this question of like, well, what is the difference between all these EQs? It tends to be harmonics and the saturations and the distortions in the in the super geeky things like the transformers or the tubes, the stuff that is made, that these analog pieces of gear were built out of. A lot of these emulations of plugins are to model the sound of what was once a historic piece of gear. Come back to me here.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, could you recommend the settings if I have like a very thin voice and I'm singing like high? What's the best options I can do?
Yeah, I can. It's hard without seeing. Again, these are kind of impossible questions to answer, but I can give you some vague parameters. I would say that thing I was talking about, the snare drum resonance of 220 hertz. If you have a thin voice, I would start there between 200 or 300 hertz and just see what comes out of boosting a lot of that, and see if there's some sort of body that comes. I would do that like right now. If you were sitting by your vocal, I would add 200, 300 hertz and see what that makes you think. I don't know that EQ is going to fix the problem 100%, so you can't rely on what I'm saying right now. But I do think that area, for example, for me, if something is super thin, that's the first thing I do. If it's not cutting high end to balance out, right? Because like again, we talked about the piano hands. If the right hand is too high and it's all sizzly in the vocal and there's not enough of this, like what does it take to get this even? Because a lot of the times for a vocal, we want a fully even experience, so the vocal sounds tall. Like if you're sitting in headphones, you'll hear it between your jaw and your forehead, right? Like you can experience the vocal gigantic. In speakers, like I judge the quality of the vocal based on how high and low the vocal goes. I have very big speakers here, so like I can hear the size, I can feel, I can see it. It's visual, becomes visual. In order to make that visual experience, we want to boost a lot of low mids in a vocal and a lot of high mid. A lot of high end. That's the air to bottom. So if you have a thin vocal, I would start by boosting, between 200 and 300 hertz, even as low as 150. Anything below that, though, you want to get rid of, because that's just rumble in the room. It's unnecessary energy that takes away from the clarity, right? A vocal doesn't really have, unless you're talking about a super bass male vocal specifically, you're not going to have much below 100 hertz. So you would want to filter. Let's look at what a filter looks like.
Could you also please demonstrate how to boost? Because I'm not really following how it's actually done.
Oh, yeah, here. We just turn up boost. Boost is add. So gain.
I can't really see your
turning
screen.
up. Oh, so sorry. The gain knob. Gain is volume. So boost, this is subtract or reduce. Boost, add. So if I was saying 200, you can even type it in. You type 200 hertz and go up 10 dB. And see what that sounds like. And then you can mess with the Q, which is how narrow and focused that boost will be, right? If it's all the way narrow, you're only boosting that exact frequency, nothing around the sides of it, right? And that's really important, because you'd only want to do things like that when you're cutting, because otherwise you're not really getting any sort of broad spectrum character added. So you want to have some sort of width on the Q. You want to have some sort of space. It might be as wide as this on a thin vocal. It might be all the way. You might be missing a lot up to 1K. Does that help? Can you see that now?
100%.
Boost just means add. Yeah, boost just means add. So when there's a gain knob, you want to be in plus values versus minus values. And if the voice is too thin, and this too much air, you'll want to reduce the air. A lot of people think that you need a ton of high end. What we really want to do, what we're aiming to do, is finding balance, right? So if something has too much high end and you boost too much low end, it could just that's one way to get balance, but it could still be harsh in the high end. So the answer to getting more of the low end might be less high end. So you can turn the vocal or whatever instrument we're talking about up. To get clarity, we just want more volume. And in order to get more volume, we might have to reduce things that are getting in the way of the clarity of the sound, right? So the goal, and all the things we're talking about, when we're talking about frequencies and gain, we're just talking about volume. And like we went back to the beginnings of class here, the definition of EQ would be volume specifics on frequencies, right? So controlling frequencies with specific volumes independently, or a range of. The goal is to get as much volume as possible. So without volume, you can't hear anything. So if we're cutting or boosting, if the whole goal is to get balance of a sound, so we can enhance the volume to make it present in a mix.
Can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
So let's say I just finished recording everything. I have my music done, my instruments done, my vocals done, my backing vocals done. What's like the most basic formula through which you mix? Do you go for, I think we talked about this in a previous session where they said just manage the volumes first before you start mixing. So what track should I prefer start with first? Do I work on my vocals first? Do I cut for my vocals or the instruments first? And then do I do them all together? Do you mix everything separately and then mix them all collectively again? It's just like, what is like the basic steps of how to do that as a beginner?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really, really great question. I very, very much avoid mixing in individual instruments separately. Because the point of mixing is the interaction of the instruments, right? So literally the purpose of mixing is to get each part of the song to play together nicely. So if you're only working on individual things separately, you'll never know how they engage with others. So actually, I hate saying never because there's almost no nevers, but very rarely do I mix one instrument at a time. It's almost never, and there will be many days or months that go by where I never touch the sound when it's so in solo mode, when it's soloed. Now that being said, I very often solo a sound to hear what is there, but I won't touch it unless I have another one soloed with it. So I will work in pairs or I will work in groups. So say you're making some sort of hip hop track, you probably want the drums to be, the drums and vocals to be the focal point of the mix. So I might spend hours just with the drums and the vocal in. But I also will spend hours with only vocals. I'll mix an acapella, for example, on a song that is very overproduced, drums, piano, everything that you can throw at it, 25 synthesizers. I'll mix the acapella and I'll spend an hour or two just on making sure all the ad libs and the backgrounds are tight, where they sit. But I'll never work on one instrument at a time. I might go with just the bass and the vocal, so I could hear the forwardness of the bass in the low end and the forwardness of the vocal in the high end. How do I get that balance? Is it some sort of like reggaeton record or like Afrobeat record where the whole groove is determined by the low end moving your hips, basically moving the body, and the vocal being rhythmic on the top, giving the excitement, right? A lot of those kinds of records have the bass doing something very different than the vocal is almost a hi-hat, right? Some of those songs have no hi-hat, and the rhythm is determined by the percussiveness of the vocal. Think like Rosalia or something like that. Like there's almost no high-end percussion going on because you wouldn't want to get in the way of her enunciation on the percussiveness of her voice. Like that determines the rhythm of the song. So if I were mixing Rosalia, I would throw a bass. Sometimes the whole record is a bass and a vocal, but if it wasn't, I would solo the vocal with the bass and see how that works out.
So you pick
now
your
thinking about that.
First. You pick your heroes first and then mix them together and then mix with everything else?
Pick your heroes first. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, I do that a lot. I've also spent hours on the internet talking about this too. So by the way, I should also say that there's probably like hundreds of hours of me on the internet on this podcast called Live with Matt Rad, which I can type. I'm going to type this, where I go more in depth on topic to topic things, where this is like I don't want to be too vague, but in 3 hours, like there's only so much we can cover. But on Live with Matt Rad, I go and I do full hours on well, what do I think? It's on YouTube. It's on anywhere you can find a podcast. It's on Spotify, probably Apple, all the things. But I would just go to YouTube, and you can see my face interact because it's all videoed, whatever. But I go into things like this, where one of the topics is called solo mode, where I'm soloing, as you put it, the heroes. I'm soloing. Well, what to me is the fundamental in a song that has 100 parts. Say let's not be too. Maybe let's go with 50 parts because hundreds is a lot. But say there's 50 parts that come to me. and I press play on the song. It's the first time I'm hearing, and I'm sitting here, and I say, well, what does this song need? Well, what is the song telling me? Like, what's the most important aspect of this? Obviously, besides the vocal, I rarely mix instrumental music. So let's go with the assumption that the vocal is the most important part always, because you're conveying the meaning of the song through the lyric and the emotive quality of the performance, whether it be sad, happy, angry, sentimental, all those moods. Let's determine, well, what sparks that mood. Maybe if I know the artist, I'll even ask how the song was written. Like, was it written on a piano, but we got rid of the piano and it's now a guitar song? Like, do we have to fake the original emotive quality that happened because in the room we decided we don't like the demo piano as much, and now it's a Rhodes and it sounds a little cold, it's not quite performed. And like, oh, can I hear an old demo? Sometimes I'll ask, can I hear an old demo of the song? And oh, wow, that's where this originated. And now we don't even have that. Sometimes that could even bring back an earlier spark. That's another conversation. That's not really my job. But sometimes you're like, wait, what happened to the song? That piano was great. But let's find the star of the show besides the vocal. So vocal's obvious star. What's the second? In Rosalia, it's a lot of the bass. In James Blake's song, for example, maybe it's a synthesizer and it's one warm, cozy, like, the feeling we're trying to get over in his bedroom in the studio. If it's Beyonce, it's probably some sort of percussion rhythm that's getting us to dance. Could be exactly. Could be an 808. Could be the bass again. But what is the second star? So I'll solo those two. Now, that's not how I always start. But I love that you brought this up because it is important to think about how you want to start. I start differently every time just for the fun of it, for the game of it, because it's like I've mixed thousands of songs and hundreds a year. So for me, I'm like, oh, what's my way in on a Tuesday? Like, maybe I'll start with percussion and vocal, which I think I did the other day, where I was just like, I just went drums and vocal, but no bass, and just what happened. Like, I don't know why I did it. There's probably a reason. Maybe it was a hand percussion drawn record, and I subconsciously felt the desire to do that. But for you guys, I would go in with the main harmonic content, the guitar, the piano, the keyboard, the synthesizer, whatever it is that is the main sound. And I would try to get the vocal, your vocal, if it's your own music, to play perfectly with that before bringing anything else in. It's so satisfying. Okay, for example, I mixed a song for Khalid that was a really big song, and it's the production is so minimal. I know I said I never do this, but I literally mixed his vocal by himself for at least a half hour to an hour. How big can I get this vocal? How much of a star can we make him, right? Like, how, they're asking someone like me to come in and make this artist, give them the best chance at when I'm working for major label things, maybe not some sort of like cool artsy indie project. And that happens too. And that's a different conversation. But for who we're talking about, like Rosalia's and Khalid's and Beyonce's, like, they're hiring an engineer to give them the best chance at success. When it's a new artist, some developing, maybe the label has just decided to sign this person. We're trying to give them the best chance. So like when it comes to Khalid, I knew the stakes, what it meant to have this song, between my speakers. And this is going on, like, I did this like 4 or 5 years ago. And I still think about this moment because there was a moment where I just added a tiny bit of distortion and saturation to his otherwise pretty clean. He's kind of a lazy vocalist, and not in a negative way, like in a moody way. It's like kind of, feels free and feels, just not too serious. And that's like Beyonce, very serious vocal. There's nothing about Beyonce that is not serious. And she's not a joking person. And Khalid's different. He sounds a bit lazy. So I remember distorting and finding this saturation that I put on. I don't know why I thought about it. I almost never have done this in the past up until that moment. But I had gotten this plugin that's super cheap. It's called JST Clipper. It's just a Clipper plugin, which is the distortion plugin. I put on the vocal, and all of a sudden the vocal sounded bigger than my speakers. What people refer to me now as a third speaker in the room. It's like there's this. If you think about a movie theater, there's a center channel and then there's a surround, and the dialogue comes out of the center channel. So no matter what's happening with the film score, you can always hear the dialogue. And that's what I want when it comes to a vocal. I want the vocal to sound like it's coming out of a center channel speaker, where it's on top of the mix, but it's also in the mix. So it doesn't sound like, oh my God, it's too loud, and you don't get any sort of impact from the drums or from the bass. But I want it to sound as gigantic as possible. So I went for more of a saturation, more of a distortion quality, clean distortion, not a guitar amp distortion like we talked about earlier. A very clean distortion, and it made him sound gigantic, right? And I like Hannah mentioned earlier, like I've also got to mix Beyonce with my mentor, by myself, and like I didn't even think about doing that to her because she already has this larger than life quality to her. Beyonce coming through the speakers, it's not, I didn't make Beyonce sound like Beyonce, like there's no way any of you are going to make Beyonce sound like Beyonce. That's just not our job. It's to enhance what's already there, and she gives it to us. Like there's very few problems with a Beyonce vocal. It's actually a dream to work with. But not all artists are created equally. And that being said, our job is to make all of these artists sound larger than life. And that's a moment I'll never forget, because I tried a new tool. And I did something I just told you guys I never do, which is solo one element. I just soloed the vocal. I almost never do that, but I did that, and it felt magical in the moment. And there's other people in the room. His team's here. I think he was here. The artist was here, and it was like a wow moment. It wasn't just me being a geek, being like, "Oh my God, that was crazy." It's like everybody goes, "Whoa, what just happened?" And those are the moments that we like. I was talking to a friend over dinner about this a couple nights ago. Just like there's nothing better than working on any creative thing. It could be a painting, I'm sure it could be any sort of art piece, when there's a moment where it clicks, where you think to yourself, whoa, it just arrived. And it might not be done, but there's always a moment where you're like, this is good. And I hope everyone has that moment, because like there's otherwise that you're just going to keep chasing something. But there is always a moment, and you have to be aware of it. It's like the idea is like this whale watching idea. I don't know if there's whales down near Egypt in the climate, but the idea of a whale watcher, it's very rare you see a whale if you go out in the ocean. But if you sit there for day after day after day after day, and you don't sleep, which I think sleep is important, so let's not go that far. But if you sit on the boat and you wait for the whale, at some point you'll catch the whale with your eyes, because you were just there. And it's the same thing with art, with creativity, with developing your skills, with your talent. You have to keep doing it every day. You have to keep practicing, because the moment it clicks and you see the whale, it's the most magical feeling. Like there's nothing like it. And that can happen as an engineer, as a geek, coming across a new compressor tool and unlocking something that you've been chasing for weeks, for months, for years. I do this every day, and every day I unlock something new, and I call my friends, because I'm a dork, and I'm like, oh my God, do you know that thing? Like that does, oh, they're like, yeah, I used that 3 years ago. I'm like, shit, like I'm behind the curve or whatever. Like there's always something new to unlock. And I think like, we can sit here and we can talk about, how to make the low end on a vocal come through, and it's really going to be, and the fundamentals are super important, and I'm really trying to convey them as much as possible without being in the same room, and being able to actually show you on a screen like the true way to do this. But it's really going to be about you finding the way that works for you, because that's the best and worst part about the access that we all have to Pro Tools. When I showed you that picture of a console, only 10 people at one point in New York City had access to use a console that that expensive, a studio like that. You only had a certain amount of access to it. Nowadays, like anybody can make a record in an hour on their computer, and because of that, there's a lot more bad music being made, but there's a lot more magical, great music being made that we otherwise would not have had by someone that. The limitations, someone would have thought, we can't do this because we don't have access to that. We don't have a label executive to pay for our time in the studio. Now you get to pull up a Fab Filter EQ and make a move, and all of a sudden you're hearing yourself like you've never heard yourself before. or pulling up a limiter or a compressor and reducing the dynamic range where you sound loose and you sound quiet, you sound soft and you sound quiet. Like, we got to talk about compression at some point really soon, because it's another really kind of important aspect to what it means to, you know, fundamentally mix a record. But the idea of compression is that you're reducing the loud the loud bits and bringing up the quiet bits, so your performance exists here in this ball that can stick in the front of the speaker. If you're too loud and too soft, then it starts to sound like a jazz record, and like that's cool too. And I mix jazz records too. We want dynamics, but the idea is how to discover your voice and your performance on whether it be an instrument or a vocal. But to do that, we need to reduce. Yes, let's dig into compression. Cool. Let's segue into compression. The idea is to reduce dynamic range, because too much dynamics, you know, think about, you know, you're in a city and, you know, you're walking through a quiet street, and then you get to, like, if you're in New York City, you get to Times Square, and it's like the loudest thing ever. It's like, it's jolting, it's surprising. There's no real, there's no real understanding of what's actually going on. It's too noisy. And then you get to a side street, it's kind of boring, and you don't really understand what's going on there. Like, this is dynamics, right? So in a performance, you have your quiet bits, you have your verse, you have your chorus, maybe you're screaming, maybe you're belting, and you need to control the two. And that's what compression does, or that's what limiting does. We're going to stick to compression because limiting is a little bit more advanced and a little bit harder to talk about, because it's a compressor with a little bit of a different functionality. But we're gonna go with compression, and it's the hardest thing to understand in mixing. Most people say it takes 30 years to master compression. So there's no way I've mastered it, but I understand it enough to discuss it. And I've also done, which if you watch any of these podcasts I've told you about Live with Matt Rad, I've spent 3 years using no compression, because I thought we could do it with other tools. And as of this year, I'm back using it because I understand the importance of it even more. I think absence from anything makes you understand the importance of having, and that's, you know, a life lesson as well as an audio lesson. And I think the compression is probably, you know, the second most important tool next to EQ. I think it wouldn't be the first thing I would reach for. I think an equalizer is probably what I reach for first, followed by some sort of dynamic control, which we're going to talk about compression as that. So compression has different parameters. The threshold is, and by the way, I sent in the chat, what's the favorite compressor for what type? We'll get there. It's too soon. We have to talk about the fundamentals. But I'm going to just send you the save. I think I already sent it, but save this is a deep dive. This link I'm sending is a deep dive into compression by iZotope, which I think makes probably the best plugins that we have access to. So I would go use, if you could get the iZotope bundle of Ozone or the I think it's called Nectar. They're channel strips that you could add modules of all different types of things. I would just, between FabFilter and iZotope, I wouldn't go anywhere else at this point, especially when just getting started. And I have super specific things that I use, like we talked about the SSLs and the EQs, but that's not as important as really understanding what something more user friendly. And iZotope does really well at having like user friendly, easy to understand parameters. So the threshold is when how to describe this? Let's use a vocal. The loud bits, the soft bits. The threshold is that line that when a loud bit crosses over this threshold, it reduces that loud bit by what we'll determine, which is what the ratio does, which is by how many dB we select. A lot of the times you stick to a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio, which means it's going to reduce the sound 1 dB for every 4 dBs. This is the complicated math that I was talking about earlier, which like we don't really have to understand. We just want to use our ears here. But if to start as practice, I would stick to a 4 to 1 ratio when you have access to what that looks like. So I'm going to pull up an ozone dynamic so we can just one parameter at a time go through. Okay, so compressor is threshold on isotopes. They want it to be easier for you. So let's pull up a sound. Let's use it on a bass. So we're gonna go to a bass. And as this blue line reduces, that is the information that is crossing over the threshold, right? So that's the reduction. This is now evening out what's happening. For example, I can tell here that the low end, because it's a bass, is hitting the threshold before any of the high information. So if the bass was too boomy, this could balance out the boominess to the presence of the upper harmonics, so you can hear the bass on a smaller device, right? So we can see this. We're at a 4-to-1 ratio. We'll get to the attack and release in a second. But the reduction, which is that meter right there, we want to get it to somewhere where it stays kind of still, it jumps, it recovers. And then the sound's gone. So the threshold, or the compression, is just simply where the sound source crosses the line that says we need to activate compression. We need to do something with this sound. It's getting in the way. It's aggressive. It's too much, whatever. Now, the important things now are the attack and the release. So the attack is and this is where people say it takes 30 years to master it, because it's very difficult to know. There are some guidelines on different instruments, which I'll tell you so we can write these down. But an attack is basically how long it takes before the initial transient or sound crosses the threshold. So, for example, on a bass drum or a bass, we want slower attack times, anywhere from 30 milliseconds to 100, because the simple math there is that a 60 hertz low-end bass cycle, a wave, a 60 hertz cycle, takes at least 30 milliseconds to actually start expanding. So if you're too fast on that, you'll get rid of the low end, which you might want to do, but that's the desired sound, and that'll come with practice and understanding. But for fundamentals here, we want slower attack times of about 30 milliseconds or longer when dealing with low end. And if we're dealing with super high end, we might want 0 to 10 to 20 milliseconds for vocals, for faster transient things with less low end. So let's write that down. For low end, about 30 milliseconds, and for high end, anywhere from 0 to 10 to grab the attack. Now, you're going to want to listen to stuff like this because you're going to hear where it starts grabbing. And the best way to do it, and something I should have talked about earlier, is the best way to use a plugin is to turn the knobs or the sliders or the faders as far as they can go to basically break the sound. You want to break the sound so you can put it back together. You have to understand what's happening. So if you just turn the threshold down a little bit and you don't see anything happening or feel anything happen, then how are you supposed to tell, what it's doing, right? So we bring the threshold all the way down. I call that maximizing the sound. Like, what are we doing to get the most out of the sound or the plugin and understand it, right? So the attack, I would go all the way fast and then all the way slow and just see what your ears say. If you're in headphones or if you're in speakers, well, what does that sound like? With a faster attack, it's going to be more grabby. With a slower attack, it's going to be softer, softer to grab, slower to grab, lets the original sound through before compressing. And you're going to you'll be able to hear the difference. And sometimes you're going to want a grabby thing. Maybe something is more intense and you want it to, like maybe a snare drum. If you're compressing a snare drum, for example, you want a faster attack because you want it to grab the attack before it compresses the tail of it, right? So if we're trying to make something really punchy, you want to have a faster attack. If you want to make something sound smoother and longer and more beautiful and open, you want to have a slower attack, a slower release. Think about tempo. Thinking about, is it a fast dance song or is it a slow R&B song? Slower song, we're going to want slower attacks, slower releases. Faster songs, we want faster attacks, faster releases, right? The faster a release of a compressor, the less you'll hear it. And the slower of a release, the more control you're offering the sound, the more it breathes, right? So this is like, these are the basics from this, right? There's another parameter called the knee on the compressor, which not all compressors have, but it's basically the slope, the softness of the attack and of the release, the way that it moves. We could forget about the knee for now. I would suggest just using what's called a hard knee, like all the way at 0 most of the time. And if you want to understand what it's doing after you practice the attack and release, then work on that. But I actually rarely touch the knee on a compressor even to this day, because I can usually get the desired result out of the attack and the release. But the goal of compression, after understanding the basic fundamentals of what the ratio, the attack, the release, and the threshold do, you also have to consider the gain, right? The gain, which is the volume, our brains hear loud as better, right? So if you just say you reduce your sound by what they call gain reduction, by like 4 dB of gain reduction, but you turn up the output 6 dB, you're going to be like, oh my God, that sounds better, because you're 2 dB louder. You need to gain what we call gain match. So if the meter says you're reducing, I'm going to turn this back. If the meter says I'm reducing by, this says 10 dB, then I want the gain to go back up by 10 before I decide if I like the sound or not. I'll say that again. If we're reducing by 10 dB, the makeup gain in the plugin should also be at 10. And I'll tell you why. Because another thing that my mentor told me all the time, because you make an adjustment to a sound, and then he would make us bypass or mute the plugin that was on. And I would always have it being a little louder than it used to be. He'd be like, nah, it's just louder, it's not better. You want to always gain match. You want every move. This is different with EQ. There's no real gain matching with EQ. It's all subjective. But when it comes to compression and any sort of dynamic control, you really want to bypass and make sure you're improving the sound, right? This is very, very key. Make sure you bypass A/B, compare with what you had before, because tools like this can do more harm than good. And so can EQ, but that's easier to fix. If you get yourself into trouble with overcompression and you get too in love with the overcompressed sound, when someone, this is really more psychological, but when someone asks you to change it later, days later, months later, years later, you're going to be more prone to being less impressed with the change, because you're going to be like, oh, there's so much intensity. Well, you're like, well, now it's just loud. It's just louder. So that's really important. When you're reducing the dB in the track, doesn't it automatically reduce the gain in the plugin? No, it doesn't. There is auto gain makeup on some plugins, but I wouldn't rely on that. You always want to do it yourself. If you're reducing the dB, yes, the track is reducing, but that's why you need the gain makeup. That's what, to answer this question here. The gain makeup or output gain makes up for the reduction. So if you're reducing a sound, again, in this demonstration I was doing is 10 dB, I need to make up the 10 dB that I'm squashing the sound. So it's easy math. You're just, whatever you see the meter reducing, try changing the release, attack, etc. But I never really notice a change. Is it because it's minimal or just a me thing? That's funny. Everything is just a me thing. I think it is subtle. You're listening for the way that it's changing the initial impact, not the entire sound, right? So in that case, to practice, I would lower the threshold so it's really dramatic. So you're reducing the sound by a lot, too much. So you already know that you're not going to keep it this way. But as you slow the attack, you should hear the initial transient of the sound come through more or less. If you're not, that is definitely a you thing. You should definitely be able to hear the difference, because you'll notice that, I mean, unless a sound has no transient and you're trying to create a fake transient, which people do with compressors sometimes, that's not what I'm trying to demonstrate here. It's very specific to, if you were to take a snare drum and you had a 0 attack versus a 40 attack, and the threshold is very far down, you'd be able to notice that there would be less of a transient attack on the snare drum at 0 than there is at 20, 30, or 40. All the smack would be taken out at 0. So I would just keep practicing that. I got the thumbs up, so good. I think you'll be able to do that. Increasing the gain turns the master to red. That's too far then. That means you're clipping, you're peaking. That's too far. That means that wherever you're reducing is not by the amount that you're making up. And are you doing this on a master bus, or are you doing this only on an individual sound? That would be, so if you're clipping the output, you want to not do that. This is hard for me to talk about or answer without seeing what you're doing. But the basic math is, if you're reducing by a certain amount, you want to make up for the amount too. That question tells me that you might have already been peaking. Therefore, you'd want to do what is called regain staging your session, which is also another fundamental that's really important, but we'll stay in compression for a little bit longer. Because the whole goal of compression, like we said earlier with my city analogy, is we want to make it a bit more of an even place to walk around in, to experience in. Too quiet, too soft, we'll leave that for classical music. I think in modern recordings, we want things to be basically as loud as possible without distorting. And that's a fine line, because sometimes distortion is really cool. But compressors help us reduce dynamic range of sounds to make them sound more professional. You know, you put a microphone in front of a voice to capture an even sound, and you're not moving back by feet at a time, you know, from the mic. Sometimes you might turn a little bit away on a high note. That's a microphone technique, and that's really important. But we want to get as even of a performance on every instrument possible, so it can sound loud on a recording. And that's what a compressor does. And it's also, like I said, it's a very dangerous tool. So you got to be really careful. You can easily overcompress and get rid of the feel. So basically, if you have if you had a drum loop, something maybe you got from Splice or your percussion we were talking about earlier, and you're compressing the drums, you have to understand that you can very dangerously affect and change the rhythm. You could change it for a positive too. Maybe the drums were recorded really loose, and compressing it just a little will bring up the quieter bits. And that's where the groove is, right? In the subdivisions. And a compressor can save the day on a performance that you thought was weak. But also, if you dial in the performance and you overcompress it and flatten the performance out, it can start sounding cold and not as interesting and not as rhythmic. So you have to, that's why the A/B function is really important. I just remember Tony always, like, I would start a mix for him, and he would go through every plugin and he would bypass every plugin, and he would be like, he wouldn't say any words. He would just like either leave it or he would turn it off. And a lot of times with me, when I was younger, he would just turn it off. I'd have to understand why he didn't use the thing that I did that I thought was the right move, right? That there's a lot of the times we make a move and we think it's tight. We think it's dope because we did it. A lot of the times some sounds don't need plugins on them because they were already good. And I think that the learning how to determine when we need to do things and when not to is really the mastery of the craft post, obviously the initial learnings of what these tools do. You're going to probably do more harm than good with a compressor the first, 100 times you use a compressor, and that's okay. And it's okay to mess up and try again. But the only way you're going to learn is by messing up sounds, because you're definitely going to do that. And I do it every day. And sometimes I come back the next day and I'm like, that sounds way too overcompressed. And then, sometimes I've already sent it to the artist and I'm stuck, and that's the way it's going to be. But a lot of the times with you guys, as you're learning and you're practicing and as you're working on your own music, step away for 15 minutes a day, hours, before deciding, is this the right move? Like, really understand what the compressor is doing. Okay, questions on compression. Vocals die, it goes down, the music goes high. Can I fix that? Yes, yes. You can fix during mixing the chorus in its highest part of the music. I feel the vocals die or the volume goes down or the music goes high. Can I fix that with compression? That's exactly the point of compression, is to get these things in balance. That problem is probably not fixed by one compressor. You know, that's probably fixed by multiple things, where if the music is getting too high and you want the vocal to stand out, yes, you can fix that by compressing the vocal more. But that to me sounds like other things are getting in the way. So maybe you have to adjust the balances of the other instruments. That's why I was talking about that moment where I mixed the vocal all by itself for a while, just to get the vocal to be the loudest thing in the mix, with or without compression, and then reassess the levels of everything under it. Because again, the vocal is the most important thing, so we don't want anything to get in the way of that. But yes, you could fix that with compression for sure. Maybe the voice in the chorus needs to come up in volume relative to the verse, right? So you could do that in multiple ways. You could, what we can call split out, where you can split the verses from the chorus track, for example, and put the choruses on a different track, and mess with that. Because sometimes you nail the sound of the verse and you know, it gets to the chorus and everything. This happens every day for me. It's like, oh, the verse sounds so good, and then you get to the chorus and then what the hell just happened? Like everything's louder, everything's in the way of each other. And sometimes I have to start over because something's going on between the dynamics of the verse to the chorus. And that's just part of the job. But a lot of this, what you're talking about, is probably the most common problem in mixing, because people tend to overproduce choruses too. So all of a sudden the chorus enters and 20 more instruments come in and they're like, oh, I want the vocal to be loud. Well, not everything can be loud, right? So rule number one of mixing, not everything can be loud, but we want everything to be loud. So I think how we achieve that a lot of the times is compression, but also volume, right? So to answer that question more simply, yeah.
Sorry, it's kind of a generic question, but it's also related to what you're saying and something you mentioned earlier. I'm trying to really imagine what it would be like to sit with an engineer to discuss the mixing of my song. And I also think about how many different people are involved when it comes to what a song should sound like. So there's a producer, there's an engineer, there's the artist manager. How do we kind of create that kind of balance where who has the right to say what? And how do you not overstep an engineer's role by saying, oh, I want everything's volume to be loud and I don't want anything compressed, where he says, no, it should be? Like, how do you navigate through this in the most collaborative way possible while still being respectful to everyone's artistic preferences? Do you know what I mean? Like, I keep thinking about this because so many, while you were talking about how you dealt and approached Khalid's vocals, it was so interesting to see like how much creative how do I even say this, ownership you had for that idea. But then I think, can the artist just say, no, I absolutely do not like that? Do they come in with a brief, or do they just let you be to do whatever you want to do and you just say, this is as much as I want to compress? Like, how does that go about?
This is all great. We'll talk about this for the rest of the class. Well, it goes back to something I talked about earlier, which is really understanding the relationship that you already have with the team, with the artist. Some people come to me because they've been working with me for 10 years and they know what I'm going to do. Some people, they're trying me out for the first time. So with an engineer, you want to talk. I mean, I think we should talk respectfully to everybody that's in the room. I always say that if you, but that doesn't go without saying. So that's not an assumption. People are really rude to engineers. This happens. I have like the engineer groups of friends that I host and I cook dinners for, and we talk almost like a group therapy for engineers. And a lot of the times that engineers don't get spoken to with respect, even at the highest level. And not saying I'm there, people way above me that have been doing this for 40 years. And a lot of times there's a lot of disrespect, but also engineers historically have been disrespectful to artists and they have a know-it-all attitude. So I think we have to switch the narrative on how we communicate with each other. So that's why this question is so important. I think if there's a reason why someone's in the room, right? So someone hired someone signed the artist, developed the artist, produced the artist enough to vouch for the fact that this artist has something to say. The artist decided to go with that producer, that manager, that label for a reason, because they think they have something to offer. And then that producer and artist and team hired an engineer to finish their mix because they think they have something to offer, right? This is like a transactional relationships. There's friendships that can come out of these types of relationships, but most of the time we have to understand that in professional environments, these relationships are transactional. Someone wants something from you, and that doesn't have to be negative. That can be very positive. I love being used. I love working. So if I'm being used, say what? Someone says something?
All good. All good.
Oh, so a lot of times I feel used, and I feel used in a very positive way. So I care how people talk to me, but I don't take it personally, right? So if I worked for 6 hours on a mix, or a day, or however long on a mix, and I send it to an artist or a team, and they go, you know, man, I think it was closer to how we had it. Thanks for your hard work, but can we walk it back a little bit? I think you went a little bit too creative and heavy-handed. My response would be, okay, great, let's start over, because of how they communicated with respect, but they didn't like it. If the same person in the same email, same text, same conversation goes, man, what the hell did you do? This sounds awful. You ruined everything we had. This almost never happens, but like if they came at it with disrespect, I'm going to be like, okay, I don't want to work with you. That's not cool, right? So we just have to communicate with respect, because I think you're entitled to the vision. Like I said earlier, it's the artist's song, and the artist manager has the best intentions, in line for the artist's vision, right? And they're trying someone like me or a producer out to see if we can get it across the line in the best way. So we're second tier when it comes to artists, right? I don't think as humans we're second tier, but in the importance and the relevance of our role in the process, I don't think that we're important, right? So I think this is going to be really controversial, and I have a lot of friends that disagree with me on this topic, but I think I'm very replaceable in every mix that I take on. If I am on vacation, if I'm on holiday, or I'm sick and I can't do it, I know 10 other people in this industry that are my friends, one of which I had dinner with last night, who can get the job done for you very easily. I think that people hire me for my taste, and I think I have good taste, and I think that's why people hire me, but I don't think that I am the only person for the job ever. There's very few artists that I can go to tell myself, like, you're the only person that can do this. It's not accurate. Like, there's a craft and there's art behind it, but there's a lot of technique involved, and a lot of people have the technique and the abilities that I share. So I think if you're trying to communicate something, just communicate it the best way possible. And if someone gives you pushback or friction, it's like, that's not how we do. It's like, that's not the right person for you. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It just means that they're not the right person to collaborate with, because they don't understand you and your needs. And like so many times I have artists or songwriters up behind me on the sofa, and like, oh, I don't really know how to technically say. I'm like, tell me a color, just like, tell me what you're feeling. Don't try to communicate.
So like in the beginning before you
No. That's I was going to get to that. No. This is like during, when someone's like, It's very rare that I'll have a briefing. This is another controversial thing. I don't really want to hear the song or know anything about the song before it's time to mix it, because the opportunity that a mix engineer has to have fresh perspective is somewhat more valuable than you guys have been living with the song for months, years, weeks, days, whatever. Then I get to go in, and if I hear a song and I don't have the stems or the session yet, then all the instinct that I had to jump in and morph this record to what it needs to be, I can't do it for 2 days, because you can't figure out how to export stems, back to the earlier issue. Like, this happens all the time. So like, I don't want a briefing. It's very rare that an artist even offers a briefing. It's just like, here's the song, we like it, make it better, right? So what I'm talking about is in the room. If you're finishing a record and the artist and the producer and the team is in the room, artists feel really insecure about how they don't have the vocabulary to speak engineer when they're with an engineer. And it's funny to me because like I don't want to have vocabulary to speak engineer either. I just happen to have it so I can be a pro at my job. I don't want to talk like about compression. I want to do this for you because, but it takes a lot. It actually takes a lot for me to want to talk about compression and do something like this, because those words to me are like so like integrated into my body that I don't ever speak them. There's just never a session where when someone says, you know, your question, the question that is the most recent question about that this in the chorus, my vocal gets lost. If I said, well, I think we need to compress the vocal more, the artist would be distanced from me in a way I never want an artist to be distanced from me. All of a sudden, I am in a different lane of language where they might then trust me more because like, oh, he's got it handled, but I never want an opportunity to distance myself from the artist. So I don't respond to that with a technical word. I would just say something like, let's get your vocal to be the most important thing in the chorus. You know, like let's confront this together. And a lot of the times, like I just mentioned, they seem insecure about like, well, I don't know how to tell you. I don't know this. I don't know. It's like, I don't need you to tell me what the song needs. Sorry, what technically the song needs. I need you to tell me emotionally what the song needs and what I'm missing from this. And that's something that anybody can communicate besides like someone with severe debilitating anxiety that literally can't communicate, which in music is rare because a lot of times people really can communicate about their art if they can't communicate with, you know, anything else. I'm one of those people. I love to communicate about the creative process. And, you know, if someone wants to go talk about the TV show that they just watched last week, I'm going to have a hard time because I'm going to have forgotten it because I'm already thinking about something that's a bit more important to me, but I can talk hours about the creative process. And, you know, we're doing that today. Does that answer the question?
Perfectly, yes. I always think that people that are engineers and that are producers might have a conflict because maybe the producer has a vision and then the engineer has a vision of what they want. And then the artist is sitting like, I don't have the technical jargon, which is something I've personally faced. And I don't want to sound like I don't understand or respect what you're doing, but I want to make that sound like whatever. But it's so cool to see it or like hear that some engineers are open to hearing people use other kinds of metaphors to explain what they want with their songs. So it's awesome.
Yeah, it's that was something I wrote in notes of things to talk about today. Is that's kind of the most important thing that I would want to take away if I was in a class. It's like, well, to me, it's very important that we understand what EQ does and compression. And to me, that's secondary at this point, but I do understand, I'm just being honest. I do understand that that's really important. You guys need to learn that. I think that if you read the link that I sent for the isotope compression thing, you're going to learn about compression way better than I can teach compression without you sitting next to me, not 40 people, like literally sitting and listening and A/Bing and spending 6 hours. And I've done that too. I've had master classes up here, and I wish I had the privilege to invite you all to do that too. There's a barrier of water that offers, you know, that not to be able to happen. But I would love to be able to do that. But I think the value of talking to someone that's doing what I'm doing on a daily basis is really that. It's really how people exist professionally in this industry. It's like it's a roller coaster, and people are crazy, you know, like people are wild. And the best way to handle crazy people is letting them be, right? Like non-judgmentally allowing someone to truly be an artist. And if you make them have to communicate like an engineer, they're not themselves and they're not comfortable and they might not want to work with you again. And I just want people to come back because I like working. So that's really it. Two people have their hands
I have one
raised.
question too. I was wondering if we could bring it back a little bit and discuss a little more about the role of a mixing engineer and when you start collaborating with the mixing engineer in the creative process. What step in the creative process? How are they related to the producers? How are they related to the mastering engineer? And how pieces work together?
Can I take a 2-minute pause to use the restroom, and then we will answer that question? Is that okay? Be right back.
Guys, I'm so sorry. Did he answer the question about mixing the chorus because we lost connection?
Yeah, yeah, he did. He said that yes, that's exactly what compressors are for. That's exactly what would help, to control all these. Another thing would be volume as well. That's what he said. So compressors would definitely work for like having a lot of sounds and loud sounds in the chorus, as well as like making sure you're like mindful about how loud each like track is. I think that's what he meant to say when he meant volume, when he said volumes.
Thank you so much, Ro.
Love you, Timo.
Love you, babe.
I had a question for the group. Sorry, because I feel like I have some pieces of the info, but I'm missing part of it. When he said like for like those really like Mariah Carey high pitched vocals, I understand the EQing part, but did he add anything else that we could do to like help make it less harsh? No.
What I
Honestly, I
remember is
think
that
I have a very
compression
lazy
can
voice,
help.
so I can't tell you. My voice is like all the way down here, so I have no clue.
Yeah. Okay,
I
it's
think
okay.
maybe
I
the
guess it's a lot of
compression can help us a little, but
yeah.
Okay.
I have no idea how to mix, to be honest. I just like when I
Well,
play with sounds, like compression helps, but at the end I feel like I lose a lot of gain as well, so I don't know.
Say that again, Gina. You use a lot of gain.
Yeah. No, I lose a lot of gain.
Oh, lose a lot of gain with compression.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's reducing. So yeah, if compression is reducing, that's why we talked about the makeup gain for every dB of compression you're getting on the meter. You want to make up the gain. That's what
Yeah,
the
before that I
makeup.
used to like keep on like playing with the input and the output, and I had no idea which does what, and I was like,
Yes.
yeah,
So
okay, this raises the volume and this raises the volume, so what do I do now?
Right. Okay. So I'm glad we're talking about this. The input is the signal coming into the compressor, and the output is the signal that's coming out of it after the threshold. All the reduction is taking place. So you would use I always leave inputs at 0 unless like I don't want to. Maybe there's a cool saturation built into that compressor that I want to get more out of, and then I'm to use it for overdrive and character. But usually the input's at 0. Just mess with the threshold and the output should just be equal to the amount of reduction that you're getting. Input and output are both volume, but it's volume in before the threshold and volume out after the threshold, basically.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right. So the role. This is really interesting because like the role has changed so much. So I could talk about the role back in the 60s and 70s and then the role now, but the role now is, we're mixers or finishers. So we come in at the end of the process. Unless you're recording and mixing, then you're kind of mixing as you go. But a lot of times a mix engineer, if that's what you're going to be, you are coming in at the end. So the song is done, theoretically, the arrangement is done. All the parts that are supposed to be in there are there. And you're determining now final balances, final, quality of the record. Is it too, is it one of the things I talk about on the podcast a lot is a lot of my friends call me an unmixer because I things come to me sounding too tight and too overcooked, I would say, and I'm trying to loosen things up. I think a lot of people make music that sounds way too tight, and there's less feeling to it. And I like to make things looser. I like to make things groove more, make your body move. I'm kind of not interested in like super tight, like EDM music, for example, which I think EDM has its place, but a lot of the times it's just a little too tight. You're like, ugh, and I'm just trying to groove a little bit. So I like to unmix. So I like to see how I can make things fall apart a bit. So I kind of do the opposite of what I think you would imagine a mixer doing, right? But that's just because I know my role and my strengths. So in the process, when you're hired as a finisher, our job is to assess and determine what the song should feel like. Like I can go back to that Khalid song as an example, where it was produced by this big UK DJ group named Disclosure. They're very, very like electronic dance music, very tight. But Khalid's an R&B artist, and I thought that their rough mix and their production mix sounded too tight, too clean, and it didn't feel like an R&B record. It didn't feel sexy. It didn't groove. And I loosened it up intentionally. And when the producers heard it for the first time, I couldn't tell if they liked it or not. They just said, "Oh, it's looser," and I was like, and I wrote back, "Yeah, how does it feel?" And they like, "Well, we really like it." Like they could have heard that as a negative, but I'm trying to see the artist for who the artist is. So my job is to determine, and not just me, all the people like me, is to determine where this record is going to be heard. Like, is this going to be in clubs? Is it going to be on the radio? Is it going to be in coffee shops? Is it going to be in supermarkets? And determine the best chance for success it has in all these different places and how it's going to translate. And for me, the thing that translates most is groove, is how something feels. And a lot of times a mix engineer in the process, coming in later in the process, doesn't have as much chance to affect the groove, because it's a bit determined already by the engineer or the producer's rough mix. But I'm always trying to take seriously my position, which is like, I'm a bit heavy-handed. I'm not very subtle. I don't know if you could tell that just by being on camera and talking, but I'm pretty opinionated, and I'm very nice about the way I communicate. But I think that we're hired for a reason. Like I had answered Nada's question before, like I'm there because someone chose me to be there. Any mixer that's chosen to be somewhere should offer something, to the record. And we're coming in at the end of the process, so we have a little less to say. And I would love to be involved in records earlier on, but it's just not the way the hierarchy of record making is these days. And I don't necessarily want to sit in the studio and record for weeks anymore. I'm too old for that. Some people still love it. I don't love that. I love mixing. I love being alone or up here with an artist and a team, and finishing and being trusted with, like, okay, Jon says it's ready. Like, that to me is the ultimate responsibility, like to birth a song into the world. It's like, I get to say that it's pretty much done besides mastering. Like, this is so cool. I'm also very I like to have a lot of fun, but I'm also take my job really seriously. That's the best. Being relied upon is like the coolest thing. How would you say the artist could portray that feeling to you of how they want it to sound? Terminologies. References are good. Would it be references? References are good. I like this Frank Ocean record. Like, can it feel more sparse like this? I love this Beyonce record. That goes hard. I like that. Yeah, references are cool. That's kind of rare. I don't often get references, but they're cool. I think the best way to portray what you want as an artist is in the way you perform it. And we're supposed to know. We're just supposed to be mind readers when it comes to how a record is supposed to feel. And if someone isn't and doesn't get the record as an engineer or a producer, they're just not the person. You can't really teach. I think what I'm saying is you can't really teach when we're talking about these more philosophical things on how to communicate with artists. You kind of can't teach it. You can say it, and then someone can adapt it to themselves. But I think it's more of a personality, like understanding, like a study of music. Have you listened to multiple genres? As an engineer, are you only into country music, or do you understand hip hop, pop, jazz, classical, hard rap, ambient? Do you listen to Bjork as well as Beyonce? Like, where's your taste? Where's your knowledge of psychedelic music from the 60s? Like, for example, like I listen to mostly Middle Eastern music from the 60s. Like, I'm really into psych music from the 60s more than I am American pop music, because I think there's more magic in the way and limitations in the way that that music was created back then versus like all the access we've had in studios in America for so many more years. And that to me is more interesting. So like if I were to play a record, I'm going to probably put something on from the 60s versus and probably from Iran or Ethiopia before I'm going to put something on in America any day. Like that's what's soundtracks my house is like Ethiopian jazz music from 1964. Like that's way more interesting to me than modern American music, because I already have a deep understanding of where that music is. It's in me. I grew up listening to it. So I'm trying to find other influences, right? And I also pay attention to modern American music because I need to know how to make things sound competitive and how my peers want things to sound. Like I can't just be too cool for school and like all of a sudden I'm just throwing, spring reverbs and tape delays and psychedelic sounds, on every pop record. It just wouldn't work. But there's something to say about the influence that we can have from multicultural music outside of our own. So like that to me is probably more important, after really understanding, compression and technique and effects and all these things that we can talk about. Like taste is most important. So I think that's why I would say that an engineer gets hired. What is this AI question? It wouldn't be 2023 without one AI question to come across. What do I think about AI in mixing and mastering? I welcome it. I welcome all the help that technology has to offer. I don't think I'm going to lose my job, at least not in the next 10 years. And maybe in the next 10 years, I don't know, maybe I'll save money. And
there's always a glitch with them. So you're definitely gonna be mute.
There's always a glitch. It's funny because I have a friend that kind of teaches AI classes. And one of the things that we've really come down to is that AI only works if you know what you want, and most people don't know what they want. So unless you understand prompts on how to ask the AI machine to get what you want out of it, you're not going to get what you want out of it because you have to know what you want. So a lot of times, like this is the same question we're talking about being hired. I get hired for my taste. AI at some point will be able to go, tell me how Jon Castelli and Serbin and Manny and all these guys mix their records and acquire their tastes. At some point that's going to happen. And then it's going to sound like things that we did 10 years ago. So I don't want to sound like I sounded 5-10 years ago. So I don't necessarily think that we won't get hired for our current taste. I do think that the amount of songs that I might work on for independent up and coming artists might go down because it'll be cost prohibitive to hire someone like me. Personally, on a philosophical conversation, I don't ever want to be out, to be out of that possibility just based on money, because like I said earlier, it's not really about the money, and you can't work with great artists that are developing if you're too expensive. But I do think AI will come in handy, really helping up and coming artists and producers finish their records and get it to a place where it's better than they could have on their own. So I welcome it for a lot of reasons. I'm not afraid of it. I use it. I mean, I use all the helpful. I mean, even just having an analyzer or a meter on an enhanced meter on an EQ is AI technology. Theoretically, it's telling me where the bass is in the song and the kick, and I don't have to use my ears. I can use my eyes, and until I go blind, I'm going to use all of those functionalities. Any more questions? We only have 30 more minutes. Maybe we should hit some questions. But not text ones, like raise your hand ones.
Sandra, Nada?
Yeah. So I want to understand a bit more about like your day-to-day life being a sound engineer. So what I've gathered so far, what makes a sound engineer stand out is pretty much the experience, because depending on how much experience you have, then your ear is more accustomed. Do you have a certain style, or like how would you stand out, would you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's kind of what I was trying to get at a little bit in my rant. yeah, this okay. So again, there's so many hours of this on the internet of me talking about my day to day, because that's what I think is most important. And I think if you don't live and you don't experience, you can't put anything into the records. And I'm I'm an introvert and I'm a dork, and I don't go to parties necessarily. Like sometimes I really love dinners with friends. I have a lot of hobbies. I care a lot about things. Like I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I listen to a lot of science podcasts and like neurology concepts and like the way the brain works. And I listen to a lot about mental health and the way that we can, especially when you're working with artists, it's like basically working with someone that has some sort of, personality disorder, potentially like the bipolar humans of the world, and like really accepting them for who they are and understanding. And the only way to do that is to read and listen and pay attention and care. And delusional. That's funny. Yeah. There's a lot of delusion. I had this one. I'll tell you a quick story, because I get emails every day from people all over the world that want me to mix their songs, and most of them are very not serious. And one of them, this guy sends me a song, and I can't believe I'm sharing this. It's very funny. And he sends me the song, and he says, hey, what are your mix rates? And very, very professional email. And at the end, he sends a link to the YouTube. And I did watch the video, and it was quite interesting video. The song was not good, but the video was actually quite good. At the end, it says, P.S. I will be the biggest artist in the world. And I was like, that's crazy, but that got me to listen to the song. I would have not even probably listened to the song if he didn't say that. It's like, you think you're going to be like this Kanye energy over here. Like, this is insane. There's a lot of delusion. There's also a lot of, I don't know, every artist does not say that. I think it's really funny. I think that you have to, I take care of myself. I'm older. When I was in my teens and 20s, I didn't take care of myself. I just stayed in the studio, slept on the floor however many hours I can get, because I was really trying to be good at something. And I would work with bands and artists. I'm from New York, and I would be in New York, and all the homies would be going out, and I'd be like, I gotta tune this vocal. I gotta edit these drums. I gotta melodyne this thing. Like, oh man, the chorus just isn't right yet. I'm gonna just stay in. And like, it got to a point where after moving to LA, I never really changed personality wise. And I had a friend, another long story short, I had a friend that was moving to Nashville to pursue music out there instead of LA. LA was a bit much for him. And as it is for me too, I just found a pocket that I like here. But I remember him inviting me to his going away party at a bar, just a low key hang. And I was like, man, I'm in a session. He wrote back very simply, your life is one big session. And he didn't mean that to cause me harm. He meant it as a joke, but I started crying. I was like, holy shit. Like, I'm not doing anything of value, to the people in my lives outside of making music. And it means a lot that I go hang out with my friend Doug. So I left the studio. I wasn't in a session with other people. Session to me meant I'm working on a song. I wasn't in with anybody else. At least I don't think that day I was. And I went and I caught the end of that hang. And that hang, saying goodbye to him, was way more important than the song that I was working on. It was a song for me. It wasn't. I was in writing, producing mode. It was a song that it didn't have to be done that night. If it was Beyonce, or if it was Ariana Grande, or like a high stakes like artist in my career, and I had to finish it, and there was a deadline, the album's dropping, like, I'm gonna stay in, and I'm not gonna go to that party. But like, you have to assess what's more important, and your friends tend to be that. Your friends tend to illuminate what you're gonna, or your family, or loved ones tend to illuminate what you're gonna put into a record to begin with. So the day-to-day life is wake up, do some sort of physical activity, make some espresso, maybe meditate, maybe listen to a podcast, go for a walk, get some sun in your eyes, roll up to the studio whenever seems right, work really hard for the time you're there, and then go meet a friend for dinner. And my life is a big songwriting session, though. It's nice. I think there's a time. What I'm saying is, I'm specifying that was a moment in my life of maybe 20 years. And then I since I'm turning 38 soon, I think I only learned this. What I'm telling you now, I think I learned like last year. During the pandemic, I think I learned to change this perspective. But I was always listening to things, like I mentioned, like I listened to a lot of music from the 60s, because I think there was a moment of freedom that was in the 60s, that if you were to go back in time and that's what you were to listen to, like you know, people that were making music because they had no, this is so hard to put this in any other way, except people that are making music because they have no other choice. And I think in a lot of popular music in the world that I work in, American popular music, or you know, UK pop music, a lot of people just want to be famous, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, I brought up the joke about the 15-second TikTok clip. The TikTok clip is funny to me because I'll never go on TikTok, and I don't think I need to. I don't think it's doing harm to my career by not being on TikTok. But I don't want to mix a 15-second song. I want to mix a body of work that someone deems important to listen to, and I'll do the TikTok version. But I'm not going to prioritize the TikTok version. I'm not going to prioritize like the background music. You know, I'm not going to prioritize you wanting to be famous over you wanting to create art. So I'm always going to hear the record from the person. Like I'm 10 months sober from social media. I'm going to probably just go the rest of my life not being on social media if possible. And point being, I think there's a mystery that is in artists from the 60s up until like maybe the 90s, early 2000s, before social media became a thing, where I don't know what Rihanna's doing on a Tuesday. I don't want to know what Rihanna's doing on Tuesday. So if I get a Rihanna song, I'm not basing like my perspective on her song on how she like talks about her daughter, or like her political views, or what she ate last week. Oh, you're vegan, so now I have this thing about like, are you like, am I supposed to mix it like you're a vegan? Like all of a sudden I'm like thinking too much about who you are as a person versus what the song is telling me. And I think people come to me, or someone like me, because I'm really not judgmental. Like I don't need to know everything about you in order to determine if I want to spend time with you. And I think the best thing we can offer artists, friends, partners, relationships, our family, is to just allow them to be who they are. And then decide if you want to, how much time, you know, you can offer them, right? Like, I think it's the same thing with a song, and the same thing like with ourselves. It's like, let's just be kind to ourselves and those people, and the art will come through. I just don't want to know too much about people. And I'm not saying that in like a lazy way where I don't care about people. I'm very empathetic, and I really want to understand humanity. That's why I listen to so many podcasts and read so many books on the human brain and the nervous system. But it's just not really important to the every day. If you have an assumption about who someone is going to be, like an artist comes up the stairs, you're working on an album for 3 weeks, and every day they come up different, that's good. We don't want them to always be consistent. We want them to they're fucked up. Sorry. They're supposed to be, you know, aloof and a bit insane and delusional. Let them be. The moment you criticize them, they're closed off to you already. So yeah, that's my day-to-day. That's what I think about every minute.
Got it. It actually kind of makes sense overall.
Anything else?
But you would say that the balance exists, or do you have to spend a few years sacrificing that kind of social life you mentioned, and you have to focus on the job in order to then, after having accomplished all of this, you can actually go out and enjoy, right?
Deep sacrifice, deep years of sacrifice.
But essentially,
not the it's hard, you know, because hindsight is 2020. I would still have prioritized different things, different people, better if I wasn't some sort of hyper focused, you know. At this time, it wasn't even engineering, because this is all before. Kind of a lot of this was before I met Tony, who told me to not be an engineer, because he knew I was writing and producing, and I was more time with artists and developing that side of things. So that is easier to get lost in, because you know, your social life becomes the people that you're writing with and you're making records with. So I would say that those my best friends that I to this day for a decade plus. I mean, one of my best friends is the biggest songwriter in the world, I think, at this moment, because he's written everything for Harry Styles and you know, I knew him, I've known him for 15, 16 years. He's like my brother. And if I didn't sacrifice, you know, time with other people to, you know, sit in the room with him and, you know, contemplate our careers and our mentors and all this stuff, and I wouldn't have one of the best friends of my life. And so I'm glad I prioritize certain friendships, I think, over others. But you can get lost in your world that the only thing that matters is writing songs. And I think the original question about the day-to-day and kind of the taste and the experience is what happens outside of the room with other people, with yourself alone, to bring into the room. So if you're only with the same people, with the same like mind, with the same views and values as you, it's hard to imagine you know, what life can be like. And then a lot of popular music contributes to the lowest common denominator, like the most, like we you know, we refer to that as like the Midwest in like middle America, of like just like super basic. We go to work, the grocery store, home, living basic lives, and with nothing extraordinary. And those are the people that listen to the music that people like me on the coast, in the coastal cities of America and in the UK and these major hubs of music are like, all of a sudden we're supposed to think we're better than these people, but they're the ones that are listening to the records that we're making. So the most important thing is to understand all and what people want, and what people really want is connection, right? So if you're getting connected through music, through a religious point of view, or you know, any sort of spirituality, like music is that, right? Music is that universal language. So we have to really understand who our audience is, and the only way to understand our audience is to pay attention outside of our four-walled studio room or our bedroom.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Welcome. Good question. That's good. Any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Hi. So I noticed, like, so I have two questions. That you have like a huge interest in, like, you know, neuro and mental health and science and all that stuff. So I was curious to know, since you're saying that you kind of cut back off of social media, how has that affected you as a sound engineer, as someone who's like completely in the whole music industry and all that stuff, with like social media nowadays being like this huge platform for music releases and all that stuff? So this is one area, and the second area is like, I feel like nowadays music has become so repetitive, and like the style is like, you listen to a new song, but you feel like, wait, this sounds so familiar, and then you kind of go back to the 60s, and it's like, wait, that they literally took the chords and they just mixed it up. So how, as like a sound engineer and having that as your job, how do you work around that, and how does, like, you know, how are you able to get out of that box and kind of be more inspired or have fresh, you know, color and fresh style and stuff?
Great question. I actually have I coined a term for what you're talking about, which is called almost music, which I think so much music sounds almost like something else, and it's not as good a lot of the time. It's like, well, you can go back to, you know, like the 60s and 70s is kind of where a lot of people are ripping from. But right now it's the 90s. Right now people are taking from the 90s, and I you know, I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it's all been done. So I think, like, you know, copy anything you want, make it your own. I would just love to have a chance to for it to sound not so obvious. So as a sound engineer, the simple answer to the question is, like, if I get the reference and I understand it, I'm gonna probably try to mess it up a little bit and figure out a way to make it current, and not like, I don't want to hear like someone do Amy Winehouse again, because Amy Winehouse sounded like Amy Winehouse, and I'm not trying to get that same exact sound. If someone says make it sound like Amy Winehouse, I'm already like, run for the hills. Like, there's no way that anybody is ever going to sound like Amy Winehouse. Make it sound like Adele, make it sound like Michael Jackson. It's like, these people are singular human beings and no one will ever be like ever again. That's the whole point of why they were incredible artists. Like there's no other Beyonce. There's no other of these people. So I don't find that too difficult to navigate, because people are going to be who they are. And yeah, but there's a lot of copying. And if, for example, as a mix engineer, because of the output that I have, like I could work on 4 or 5, 6 songs in one day. And sometimes with different engineers, different producers, different songwriters, different artists, I swear to you, I've mixed nearly the same song in the same key with almost the same melodies many times, where it takes me a second to go, wait, didn't I finish that one already? And like, I opened up a new session. This is tricking my brain. It's literally, and I'll go back, like the same key, the same chords, but a different melody. I'm like, wait, didn't I just, or the same exact, bass drum and snare drum sound, or the same synth sound. Like but that's bound to happen when 70,000 songs are coming out every day. Like there's just bound to be repetitive. On the social media front, to answer that part of the question, social media affects me pretty negatively, and I was actually really good at it, meaning I've spent less than an hour a day on it. I was in the top 1% of lowest usage based on statistics. But for those 45 minutes that I'd be on Instagram, seeing what songs were coming out that I didn't work on, that I wish I worked on, with teams that I used to work with, and whatever, the amount of like depressive episodes coming after, like all the ruminating on why didn't they, why not this. It's like, I'm not trying to compare myself to other people. If someone wants to hire you, they hire you. If they used to hire you and they don't now, there's a million reasons why. It's never personal. Like, unless I've done harm to someone, like it's a budget thing, or they met so-and-so and they want to try this person out, or now they have access because now they have a hit. Like a lot of my story is I developed a lot of big artists, and then when they have super success, they go to one of the top 4, 5 mix engineers that have been doing it for 40 years. And who am I to fault them? They have 800 number 1 hit songs, or whatever their number is. Like, why not go to them? Why keep working with me? And I'd love to give people a reason to keep working with me, but you can't sell yourself, right? And on social media, a lot of times you're selling. And as an artist, you have to. As an artist, I think you really have to. As an engineer, I shouldn't have to sell myself. The credits should speak for themselves, and my relationship should speak for themselves. So, if I don't have enough work in a year, that's on me, because I'm not communicating with people outside of social media. That being said, it's easy to communicate on social media and to remind people you exist. So you can like check in, like, hey, I love that song you did. Like, would love to jump on something together soon. Like there are ways, but the value of it doesn't outweigh the negatives for me. And I was just going to do a month off because I had heard, on a podcast that like the way that it stimulates like deep brain stem is the same as any sort of like, drug or chemical addiction. So you should always, if you can, do 4 weeks sober from any addiction, and the physical addiction is gone. And then it's up to you to maintain that. So after a month went by, I was like, I don't want to go back on it. And it's been 10 months and I just don't have any desire. The only reason I think to go on is to connect with some producers that I don't have their phone numbers for. It's like, that's not a good enough reason. Get their phone numbers, get their emails, hang out, find a mutual friend to introduce you. There's just better ways than having to go through the negative effects of social media to get it. And that's just for me. I think I'm sure there's so many positives like to the platforms that, I think it's depending on how people, use it and monitor their time. But even at my minimal time of 45 minutes, 30 minutes a day, it still was affecting me, and find myself comparing to things. And now I don't have any of that. And it just feels so much better. Just feel happier. I don't know.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And one last like comment. I know like, a sound engineer is different from an artist, but like with the evolution of social media and all that stuff, would you like how like I know like having social media is a plus, and especially nowadays with everything being like on the internet and stuff, it boosts a lot of stuff. But in the same time, let's say, for example, I'm kind of like you, like, I don't like social media, just I don't like the rush. I don't like the because like I have a degree in psychology, so I know the drawbacks and the negative stuff that, being a complete obsessed person or a person who's addicted to social media, it fluctuates our dopamine levels and stuff. So like, for example, would there be an alternative as an artist to more or less kind of, not a matter of send out our music, but just I don't know how to explain. Does that like do you get
There's
what I
no
mean?
alternative. There's no alternative.
Yeah, right.
Right?
It's
There's no.
just you gotta
I think
just do
well,
that.
the alternative would be to hire someone that
Mhm.
posts the content for
Yeah.
you. The people like this exist. Like that's probably what I'll wind up doing if I need to have some sort of presence for my
Yeah.
credits, because credits for engineers are nowhere really. So that part I'm probably losing some people knowing what I'm working on. I just don't know if I care, but that's a personal thing. Because I'd rather not have the dopamine rushes and crashes and wondering why I'm depressed day 2 when nothing changed in my life except for staring at a phone. It's just like my life's good. I should be okay. So I think that there's no alternative except for showing up places. But like, you're not in Los Angeles. You're not around all the people that are putting out the records and I don't think that there's an alternative. I think you have to
Man,
to
sometimes I
use
wish
it.
I was sometimes I wish we were like the old times were kind of still around.
Yeah.
Because
I think that's
yeah, because like the amount of crashes that we have and like the change in psychological development. But anyway, thank you for answering questions.
No, I spent a lot of time with my elders and my friends talking about this. I think I was born to work in a music industry of a different time. It's like I really care about things that were labored over and cared for in 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and I was born a little too late, and now the things and records that I think I hold dear are not as important. But I'm just adapting, and it's fine because I just love music at the heart of it all. And for me, the mixing of the mixing aspect of, like, say, because songs, the attention spans have been so shortened and truncated. So the lengths of songs, I've noticed, it's insane because like, again, the output, I noticed the change from 4-minute songs to 3 minutes to 2 to I mixed 2 songs on Sis's album that are barely a minute long. It's like, and they're songs. She's not calling them interludes, or I call them ideas. They're not even full songs. And I've noticed this, and this is attention span issues, and I'm not going to fault it. I'm just going to get better at understanding how it's like a scientific problem to me, or a math problem. It's like, how do you make a 1-minute song journey compelling and interesting? Like, you want to play it back again. It's like pop music that's 4-bar loops or 8-bar loops of the same things over and over again, to me becomes a math problem of like, how interesting. How can I really make the same 4 parts not interesting for 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes? Like, that to me just becomes a game. So I find just I just find a different love for my craft every day. The social media thing, though, is just like, I have zero love for it. I do miss certain friends that I probably would have communicated with more regularly, but they can text me. I still got a phone.
Yeah.
I'm still getting a little dopamine. I'm still got a phone. I'm still talking to people. But I just don't want to be scrolling and find yourself in a 15-minute, cesspool of like what everybody else is doing, portraying the best version of their lives, when I know that's not accurate. I just know these people, and I'm like, I just got off the phone with you and you're having a shitty day, and you're letting everybody else know that I want to know that you had a shitty day. We all have shitty days. Tell me more about the shitty day. So
thank you so much, John, for answering those questions.
Of course. Anybody else we haven't heard from? Could be another mixed question.
I think there's a question in the chat.
So what?
I think there's a question in the chat.
Oh yeah, from Zaina.
Yeah, my question was
wow.
My question was, hi, hello, how are you?
Hello, hi.
I was asking if there is any like fundamental plugins that you use for mixing, and if there is an order for them, can you please state them in that order?
Yeah, I would stay with it. The one I was using mostly, that Pro Q3, is probably like the most. If I had to pick one plugin, I would probably have to use that. And then anything by the company Isotope that I sent the link for all of their dynamics, their compressors, their saturation tools, anything by Isotope and FabFilter, I stand far behind because they user friendly, they sound really good, and they pretty much encapsulate all the old school tools in a very modern sensibility and usability. So in order, I would that's a hard thing to say, but I would say that the Pro Q3, finding a limiter or a compressor to use, which I use the Isotope ones, they're just called dynamics basically. I use that all the time. What else? The SSL is very good for characteristic boosting, like like we're talking about, like the difference between EQs and character. I would say the SSL is having one version of that is kind of a must for more of the additive gaining up of frequencies. The compressor in the SSL channel strip is also very good, also very fundamental. I would just start there. I basically use 10 plugins. Like I just gave you 5, but I only really use 10 plugins. People laugh all the time when I say this online, but I have like 100 plugins on my computer. Probably use 10 on a song because I just like to get the job done really quickly. And I know what the tools, like I would spend so much time on one tool and just learn that tool. Like, going back to one of the earlier conversations about like the life balance, like screw your friends for like a week and learn one plugin and then go hang out with your friends for a few days and then come back and pick another plugin and like do that for a week and really use every aspect of it. And like I mentioned earlier, and I should say it again, I should reinforce, you want to break the sound. You literally want to turn up every knob that is offered to you on these plugins to see what they do. Because if you think everything is supposed to be subtle, you'll never really learn what they're doing at their maximum potential. So when you got an EQ in the mid-range, just turn the mid-range EQ up as high as it goes and just see what happens to the sound. This is how I do everything. I don't not do this because I've been doing it for 30 years, or not 30 years, 20 years. I literally just do it every time I turn a plugin on. I take one setting and I turn it all the way up and I just see what the sound has to offer. So it's less about what the plugin is and how you use it. So I would just start with that Pro Q3, SSL, Isotope, everything that they have, and go into each module in Isotope. And I don't know how I could stand behind this, but if Hannah, I don't know how I can do this, but the Isotope stuff is kind of expensive. So I don't know if there's like I think there's educational discounts, but because of my friend working at the company, I wonder how many I can get offered. So if people don't have it, I wonder if we can circle back, be like, hey, Dave, it's Christmas. I just taught this class in Egypt. Like, can we just like get a bunch of licenses? I can't promise anything, but I could maybe get like 5 of you like licenses or something like that. So maybe we can message about that off this. No hopes up, but I feel like Dave might be down or something like that. Maybe you have to do like a challenge or something, like a mix a song.
We're in.
That would be super cool. Maybe I can connect you with Dave and how we can make that happen. But he just gives me free plugins every time they come out. So I'm wondering how we can. Maybe you have to have a competition inside of the class and who made the best beat, and a blind listening of who made the best sounding song, and the best 5 get a plugin from Isotope or something.
We will figure that out.
I don't know. This isn't a.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
That could be fun. Make a fun thing. I don't know if this isn't a full democracy. I don't think I can get everybody, free healthcare. But we try here in America, but it's everything's privatized. So.
Angie, did you have a question?
I have a question. I've been learning music production and mixing for maybe 2 years now. And mixing I started like last year, so I took courses and stuff, but still my mixing sounds like shit. I'm sorry, but it sounds like shit.
So
It
does
sounds
mine.
like you're
So does
listening.
mine.
What? No, I don't think so. But okay. It feels like I'm listening to the song in the bathroom, like even though I don't put too much reverb, but like the instruments isn't as clear as I want it to be. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Like I really don't know. Like I want it to be every instrument to be clear and to be able to hear every individual instrument clearly. Yeah,
Yeah, the first thing to do is
that's a problem.
delete the bathroom plugin off your computer for sure. That's the first thing to do. We don't want the bathroom. We never want to be in a bathroom with music. I have a story about that. I tried to
Like it's
record
too
in a
much
bathroom once.
reverb. Like
Yeah. But why is that the case? If you're saying you're not adding reverb, then there shouldn't be reverb
I'm not
unless you're
adding
capturing
that. Yeah.
sounds. Is it all live instruments?
No, actually, it's all MIDI.
Then there has to be a reverb on the sound that you need to turn off. Has to be.
But like
if you're saying that it sounds like it's in reverb,
too dry. It's too dry then if I turned off.
Well, you have to blend. So there's got to be a reverb knob where you need to maybe go half the amount that you have. But I want to say something on the dry thing. I think you need to experiment personally. This is for you specifically, actually for everybody. But if you're having this issue, you need to find confidence working with 100% dry signal first. Like the best, I think that the best records that really express vulnerability and the true vision of what the artist had to say tend to have less back to like the Rosalia thing, Frank Ocean. These are like zero reverb artists. They don't have reverb on anything, and that's intentional because it's bold, it's brave. Reverb tends to smooth over and hide and put some sort of like glossy picture frame over like the raw. It's like the print instead of the original. It's like the reprint or something, the replica. I would go full no verb for like 3 months. Maybe go a month. Do it 4 weeks. 4 weeks no reverb. And
okay, I'll try that.
And email me the before and the after of the reverb and no reverb, because I think this is actually we're running out of time, but this is really important because I think if you have a lot of reverb on sounds and you're okay, let's go back to compression for a second. Compressing a sound after reverb is almost a hard no unless you really know what you're doing, right? So you'd want to be making all the things that we talked about with EQ and compression today. We want to be doing these things probably before reverbs, almost always. And then after a reverb, you're going to probably want to EQ again because the reverb is going to then bring up this cloudy, elongated version of mud that's in the sound, right? That's why we put them on other tracks, not deliberately on the same track. So you can EQ them, saturate them, distort them separately. And the raw, dry sound. So when I hear you talk about that, everything sounds like it's in a bathroom. Well, we need to get out of the bathroom 100%. The only way to do that is to just mute all reverbs, mix the song without reverbs, and then figure out a way to put the reverb back in subtly. Like another thing I should mention that we were asking, like, where do you start on a mix? A lot of the times I start with muting every reverb because if the reverbs are sent to me separately in different stems, it's easy for me. I just mute all of them. Sometimes none of them make it their way back in, and I'll add my own to change it. Sometimes they all make their way back in just like 10 dB quieter, or sometimes they make it back how they were. But you need to, it's very rare that I'll mix with the reverbs on for very long because the way you want to shape a sound is before reverb. So I'm so glad this question came up to wrap up. I would just challenge everybody to use 0 to 10% reverb for the next month to a year of their life. Like I'm doing social media for 10 months, no reverb. It's no reverb.
That would be a challenge. Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, for this isotope challenge that might happen, the person who has the most reverb doesn't get the plugin. So the bathroom artist not getting.
Okay, that would be me.
I'm kidding. Reverb is cool. But my point of saying that and bring your reverb back in, to spend some time without reverb on to really understand what these kind of powerful tools of EQ and compression and saturation, distortions, and can do without that. And I would just challenge you to shape the sounds without the verb.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? We definitely covered a lot.
Okay, I have a question. It's about gaining, because what I know about mixing that it's better to work all the tracks below 0. So do you recommend that I don't reach the 0 point?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it's called gain staging. It's definitely one of the fundamentals. It's hard to teach without showing. That's why I didn't talk about it too much. But yes, theoretically, you'd want to be. I actually like to keep the faders at 0, but you don't want the sound meter, the level, the volume of the track to be above 0. So to be safe, -6, which would be like maybe in the yellow territory, is where you would want things to peak at for a good quality sounding record. I would challenge to go as low as -10, but then you're going to have to remember to make it up on like whatever your master fader is, so it sounds competitively loud after the fact, and you can use a limiter or something or a clipper, for example, to make up that gain. But yes, individual tracks should be between -6 and -10. Definitely, that's gain staging. That's another like week-long class that's very difficult to communicate, especially over. But if you write down gain staging and Google gain staging, I would tell you to spend a week studying gain staging. It's probably the most important thing about engineering, but it's also the hardest to discuss. And the master track should reach 0. Yes. You would definitely want to peak at 0 for the master for it to sound competitive. Yes. But -6, -10, don't hit the red. And you can use the makeup gain on a compressor to do that. You can use the fader to do that. You can use any output. I use the output of the Pro Q3, for example, to bring down my level to a normal place that I like it at -6. I use the built into the EQ. There's an output. So any output, because we talked about how plugins have inputs and outputs. You can use any output, any input to lower the gain so it doesn't clip.
That's very insightful. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, guys.
All right. Any final thoughts? Feeling good?
I think I've said a lot.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I also know that you were sick and not feeling your best this week, so thank you even more for showing up and helping us. And I'd love to.
I was really excited to do this.
We so appreciate it. And yeah, and I know all the artists are grateful as well. So,
I don't know your protocol like after things like this, but if anybody wants to send things to listen to for notes, I'm not the best at response time, but I will try to listen. So if you wanted to connect of some sort for that, Hannah, I don't know if that's like normal for you guys. I love giving feedback. So it's the end of the year, so I'll be traveling a little bit, but if there anybody like felt confident to send something and wanted some notes, I'm definitely all for that. And Hannah has my email already. So
perfect. Well, thank you so much again. Enjoy the rest of your day. I did record this session, so I will be sharing it with the entire crew. And Jon, you're the best. Thank you. Okay.
Right back at you guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
Bye bye.